It's like he's never read a book or an article or is aware of anything that's around him that's not on a stream. Chat, look at this. Destiny said, exclamation point Delaney. Delaney made a ton of amazingly effective challenges to progressive platforms tonight, revoking private insurance, isolationist foreign policy. Expect to see progressives on Twitter incredibly ass-pained about him for the next day or two. That is a worse prediction than any prediction I've ever made in my entire life. Like, how do you think this guy is smart? Seriously, this is such a basic question. It's mind-numbing how basic this is. Like, and he's saying he knows policy better than Sam Seder.
If you borrow against the value of your shares, you never have to pay taxes.
Holy shit, same shirt. This was a month ago. Oh, fuck, exposed.
So you can spend money.
Somebody in chat has to tell me, I'm not going to take his word for it. Somebody in chat, do you borrow against the value of, I know that you can take out a loan, for instance, against your 401k or like a Roth IRA, but those you have to be able to show hardship to do that. You can't just do that willy-nilly.
Yes, you can.
Let's mold in the Central Committee. Let's cringe in the Central Committee. Let's bog in the Central Committee right now.
All right, chat. Let's watch this garbage. Oh, God. I'm going to vomit. But it's Sam Seder. I love me some Sam Seder. We're going to watch this because the Democrats are surrendering in Congress and doing jack shit. So let's watch this fucking shit show of a loser centrist who doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. Go.
Everybody on my fan base knows who you are, but if you want, you can introduce yourself just for people that might not. Go for it.
My name is Sam Seder. Hello. Nice to see you all.
Gotcha. I'm Steven, a.k.a. Destiny, whatever. People know me from politics online. All right. I've been a big...
People know him for politics? I don't know about that, man. I think people know of you for other stuff.
Big fan of yours for a long time. We've talked in the past on a podcast. I'm not a fan, however, of the Majority Report because I think that a lot of your conversations go significantly left of where I would take them.
What? What an absolute dipshit. So what's happening here is Destiny has for a long time been like, oh, I love some Sam Seder. But when Sam Seder's entire show is structured and designed by Sam Seder about the topics he wants to talk about and explains his beliefs with like authors, journalists, and subject matter experts in the most robust fashion possible, Destiny doesn't like that. See, what Destiny likes you to do is Google things after you already have your conclusion, and then Google your conclusion, and then try to pull whatever thing you can from the first 5 links on your Google research results. Oh, God. Oh, my God. This is so embarrassing already. Let's keep going.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was student loan debt and like debt forgiveness, because it's like a really hot topic in a lot of the online kind of world today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to that. To be honest with you, like I forgive me, I don't watch a lot of other shows.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine you don't have a lot of time to do that yourself.
Yeah.
And so I was a little bit.
He's got the Soylent out, chat. The Soylent. Okay. The Soylent. He's taking it seriously. Here comes the Soylent sweet. He's got a sweet swig of Soylent.
Would be for it. So I'm interested to find out what the issue would be. I think maybe just from a really super broad strokes perspective, I mean, maybe if we can start with the premise of what we want out of public policy, just as a watershed to sort of assess it from that perspective.
I think from a broader point of view, if we were to back up and look at like education and what is the government's responsibility in education, I'm pretty sure that we would probably 100% agree on that. So like, I don't.
Okay, but you don't. Why does he do that? Just say your position. Stop trying to say what the other position's person is. Oh, I think if we zoomed out, we would 100% agree. Fuck you. No. You're saying you don't support student debt relief. You don't agree. I think that education should be free. All students who qualify academically for the spots should be allowed to pursue their education for free. And that should be paid for by taxes through public institutions. That's the different position than I think that society should educate people to some outcome that I deem it to be worthwhile. That's not the positions that is held by everybody else. No, you have a different position.
I think that cost should ever be a prohibitive factor for people deciding to go to school. It seems like across most of Europe, that results in like highly subsidized education, or if you don't have the means to pay for it, completely free education. We might quibble over like, should it be universally free versus should it be like, I guess, means tested free or whatever, but I'm pretty sure that you and I probably agree relatively similarly on that.
So question, chat, how many 18-year-olds have high incomes? 18-year-olds don't, with few exceptions, don't have high incomes. Their parents do. So what you're saying is that an 18-year-old adult should be in hock to their relatives and their incomes, and we should preference our aid to individual students based on the position of their parents. Now, I can tell you right now, rich people send their kids to private schools. For example, private schools in Omaha, Nebraska, right? If you have extra wealth, you don't send your kid to that public school. You send them to a private school. Similarly, most rich people try to send their children where they have legacy admissions to some sort of private university. I would love that if rich people decided we're going to send our kid to a public university because it's free, that would be great. I would be in favor of that. I would be in favor of wealthy people, wealthy children of wealthy people, going to these public universities and forming relationships with other people so that maybe their human empathy will make them feel guilty the next time they try to avoid paying their taxes. Doubt it, but maybe. It's a good thing for people from all walks of an economic strata to interact with each other in a non-hierarchical fashion. You know, not be the only time a rich person ever interacts with a poorer person is to give them orders at a job, but rather to see them as equals. That's good for democratic norms.
There should never, ever be a single kid that wants to go to college, but he has to make the decision not to because he either can't afford to go or can't afford to not work while going. Yeah.
Right.
Well, you shouldn't work while going to school. You should be 100% focused on being a student. And that's what wealthy people do. Wealthy people have their children not work when they go to school. Because if you work and go to school, you'll have less time and attention to spend on things like socializing, a very important thing that is underrated by weirdo, psycho, rich, neoliberal fucks, networking, and time on education, on studying, on doing the projects. That is actually what you should be doing. Networking, socializing, spending time studying. You shouldn't have to schlep your ass to work all the time. You should be focusing, when you're a student, on education. If you have to work to go to school, that sets you behind everybody who doesn't have to work to go to school because they have the chance to spend that time doing other things. You should not have to work to go to school.
And I mean, I think, the best way to achieve that would be like a free option, state colleges,
Sure.
as we call them now. Maybe they would have to be federally funded, where you would have the option, the ability to go to that college for free. Mm-hmm. There's some people I've actually interviewed professors who were concerned about.
Of course, Mike would value socializing as a socialist. I'm trying to help you push back against the right-wing brain that Americans have, which is like, everything you must do must be vocationally centered. If you're poor, you have no right to have leisure. Oh my God, you're a poor person and you went to a movie. Oh my God, you're a poor person and you played a video game. Fuck you. Everybody should have the right to have education and leisure. Okay? It doesn't matter if you're rich. I'm sorry, you're not productive enough for a vacation. Fuck you. Everyone is entitled to leisure. Everyone's entitled to socializing. Everyone's entitled to having a nice meal, a gourmet meal even, a steak. Okay, I'm vegan, so maybe not the steak, but you get my point. The volume is low on them. Okay, I'll turn it up. Sorry about that. I didn't mix the audio for this, so.
free college to go to every college that is out there, and that's
Why is
not-
Sam so
that's not
quiet?
what that idea would be. It would be to make sure that
Jesus.
everybody has that option and that opportunity to go to college for free. But broadly speaking, too, I mean, I think even more broadly beyond education, the idea is that we want
Is there wait,
policy-
real quick? Is there a way that you can boost your microphone just a little? I can't see a way to do it on. I don't want to sound like I'm screaming over you or anything.
How about this?
Yep, perfect,
Is that,
great.
Is that better?
Yep. Okay, go for it.
And then broadly speaking, I think that for me,
Okay, they
the
figured
way
it
that
out.
I assess
They figured it out.
a policy is that it helps. I tend to like universality in policies because I think it makes them more durable. I also think that often means testing ends up being super inefficient if the idea is to save money on policies like that. But from a political standpoint, I think they're also much more durable. I also, I think the idea behind, for me, for forgiving college debt is that it's going to.
So here's a study that I wanted to show you. Eligible but not enrolled. This is a problem, with means testing. Eligible but not enrolled, because whenever you means test something, you throw barriers up in front of the program, which means that people have to have the wherewithal and the knowledge to navigate those barriers. And actually, paradoxically, richer people are more capable of navigating barriers. So when you set up means testing, actually what happens is there is an adverse selection effect, which actually puts more uneligible people who get enrolled and eligible people who are not enrolled. It makes the program worse because of as I said, those processes. More than 6 in 10 uninsured children qualify for Medicaid or the state children's health insurance program, but are not enrolled. So in other words, 60% of uninsured children actually qualify for insurance, but because we set up a means testing program for CHIP, that's what that is, they don't get insurance, which means their parents don't take them to the doctor because they think they can't afford it. Now, if you just had a universal healthcare program like, say, Medicare for All, everyone could know, oh, I want to go to the doctor. And instead of them having to fill out a stack of forms like this and get their income statements and their pay stubs and their whatever assistance programs and making sure they don't have the excess wealth, blah, 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 they would just get healthcare for their kids. That is the reality of why means testing is bad. Even if you only cared to give help to poor people, if you only cared, you would still think universality is a better way of doing it, because there are many people who are unenrolled, who are eligible because they don't have the means or the wherewithal or the knowledge to even apply. Because when a program is not universal, you have to know about it to even apply for it. How many of you know all the programs of the federal government? I don't. I study it every fucking day. So when you make things means tested, you inherently are already shutting people out who need the help. And this is and by the way, designers of means tested programs know this, and they make them cheaper. Means tested programs are cheaper, not just because of means testing, but because a large percentage of the eligible population will not take advantage of the program.
Free up a lot of people to make decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make.
I'm a bit confused. What is means testing as compared to checking income and wealth? That's what it means. That's what means testing means. Means testing means. The definition of means testing is you check someone's income and wealth before they're allowed to enroll in the program. And so only people that you determine to be eligible, which is arbitrary and set by the designers of the program, get the assistance. The people that make too much money or have too much wealth do not qualify. So you could kind of think of means testing as saying this program should be a poor people's benefit. And then the government has to spend money on advertising means testing programs too, and they have to set up a bureaucracy to handle the forms, right? So if you means test a program, right, you need to have a bunch of bureaucrats that are sitting there checking people's means. You have to have a bunch of bureaucrats approving and denying people. And guess what? Those bureaucrats make mistakes. So then you have to set up an appeals process, and you've got to set up this multi-tiered system, and then you need surveillance, which means you need invasive, you need all these people to be reporting all this information in order for you to test them, right? So now they have all this reporting requirements, documentation requirements that they have to remain organized, have to remain current, and before you know it, you've got a huge pile of red tape, and it prevents people from getting the help they need. Or you could do it like they do in the UK. You know how you get healthcare in the UK? You go to the doctor. The doctor says, hello. Oh, you need this treatment? Here's your prescription. And you walk out. Done. This is why means testing is stupid. And we're not even getting into the political side. We're not even going to get into the political side because there's a study I just recently read that shows that when you make something means tested, it becomes stigmatized. It becomes a poor people's program. And then some people who are eligible don't want to sign up because they don't want to stigmatize themselves. Think about food stamps. I know a lot of people that don't sign up for food stamps because that's for poor people. And they feel the shame of taking out their benefits card at the grocery store and paying for their food stamps because everyone gives them side eye. Everybody looks at what's on their on the belt. Ooh, they've got steak. They're paying for lobster. They're paying for soda. They're paying for candy. And then everybody thinks they have the right to judge you because food stamps is a poor people's program. Universality. And then people are in favor of cutting food stamps because, why? It just goes to the lazy poors. This is why means testing is bad.
That I don't think that the government should be in the business of making money. I mean, we both agree that the government should provide an option of free college to be making money off of college loans. I think also.
And by the way, this is a point. It doesn't seem like Destiny's responding to that point, so I'm going to stop it because it's important for you all to know it. A Brookings report from the spring of 2015 relays the figures from a recent Congressional Budget Office analysis showing that the federal government may have profited in the order of $135 billion over the prior 10 years from student loan repayment. According to Brookings, how you assess the profitability of the student loan racket will depend substantially on the accounting method you use, whether you employ the method of calculation required of congressional budget officers under the terms of the Federal Credit Reform Act, or you employ an alternative method called fair value. So the government is literally profiting $135 billion off of student loans. Does that piss you off? That pisses me the fuck off. The government should not be taking money from people, not based on their income, by the way. It's based on what you owe. You make your payments, and the government profits or it doesn't. It doesn't go, well, we're not going to profit off of the poor people with student loans. No, they profit off of everybody who's paying their student loan back. That's stupid. That's regressive.
We've seen the debt itself just in terms of like what the drag that it acts on the economy. I think is highly problematic. In addition to that, although you could probably deal with this through a change in bankruptcy law, it's very, very, very difficult to discharge this debt. And so broadly speaking, I mean, those are my principles. But even I think there are other sort of subsets of that, which make this college debt even more problematic in my mind.
So there's a lot of different.
How does Destiny describe his political stance? He would describe his stance as omni-liberal, which is a made-up term used to mock everybody else who actually takes politics seriously. He doesn't really have a fixed ideology. Looking at him, I would call him a liberal. And not in the American sense. So not like Chuck Schumer is a liberal, more like a traditional European sense, like a liberal. So that's more closer to a conservative in your conceptions. That's like a Mitt Romney. I would say he's more of like a socially liberal Mitt Romney type. But that social liberalism is kind of contingent, right? He's he says stuff that Mitt Romney wouldn't agree with, like that, you can say the N-word in private and that's funny. And so there's things like that, mow down dipshit protesters, white redneck militias, that stuff. So his social liberalism is kind of contingent on who is doing what. So if you're a black person protesting police brutality, you don't have the right for that. But if you're a white person making racist jokes to your friends, then he would be in favor of that. So he's kind of like, kind of a crooked line, so to speak. Like Dave Rubin. Yeah, Dave Rubin is a good example. A Tory. Yeah, I think a Tory is a good example. Yeah, a conservative. Yeah, a conservative then. Just conservative. The German Liberal Party would be a fit for Pepe Ladi. Oh, the Swedish Liberal People's Party. Yeah. This would be his party. Yeah. That would be his party. Incest and necrophilia should be legal according to the youth branch of the Swedish Liberal People's Party. Yeah, there you go. We found his party. He's famous for arguing in favor of incest and necrophilia online. So this is not like I'm not like making a low blow shot here. This is his open stated position. So don't think that I'm doing like a low blow shot here. I'm making things up. Like, no, this is something that he agrees with. Anyway, let's keep going.
There's a lot of different places.
Are you
to go
lying
with this.
again, Mike? No. He's argued in favor of legalization of incest like 10 times.
So we start off on the common ground that I think that we agree that college should be free or heavily subsidized. I'm never going to fight on that in terms of like somebody wants to make it universal versus means tested. Either way would be way better than what we have now, I think, in terms of making it more accessible for everybody. So the part that I kind of like lose people where I lose people is that when we start to have broader conversations about like student loan debt and its impact.
I think Destiny's argument on incest, just to be fair to him, is that most people don't have a formal like philosophical reason they argue against it. It's just kind of like this innate revulsion where you just kind of reject the idea from sort of like an animal instinct. And for most of us, that's enough, but for him, it's not. So
somebody wants to make it universal versus means tested. Either way would be way better than what we have
DBS
now.
Thank you for the tier ones.
In terms of making it more accessible for everybody. So the part that I kind of like lose people is that where I lose people is that when we start to have broader conversations about like student loan debt and its impact on people that have that debt, when you talk about people that actually have degrees, I'm going to make a really extreme claim
first
here.
First of all, that's not the world of student loan debt. He just made a lot. He just made wow, what a sneaky, weaselly little liar, dude. Student debt doesn't mean student degree. Degree holders are separate than people who have student debt. I'm going to do a little Googling here just so I can make the point. Hold on. Almost 40% of borrowers with student debt didn't finish their degree. So, well, let's just talk about degree holders. Well, that's, you almost did about half of student loan debt you just walked away from. Huh. So we can't just look at people with degrees and say, well, that means the debt was worth it. You actually have to look at the fact that student debt is taken on before the degree is completed.
I think that the quote-unquote student loan debt crisis, I think, is almost entirely fabricated. I feel like it's...
Okay, he's a total idiot. Consequently, outstanding U.S. student loan debt reached $1.7 trillion. You've probably heard another scary statistics. Americans owe over $1.71 trillion in student debt spread out among 44.7 million borrowers. That's about $735 billion in total U.S. credit card debt. So if you took all the credit cards that's used for all consumption in the country, we owe almost $739 billion more than that. Think about so we have what's known as a consumer economy. So consumer demand is what helps our economy grow. That is being held down by massive student loan debt. So people are servicing student loans instead of like buying cars, buying homes, going on vacations, buying computers, buying video games, buying services, going out to restaurants. It's all going down the black hole of student loan debt. So the idea to say that this is not a crisis is absurd. It's the number one source of debt.
It's a hot talking point, literally only because the vast majority of people that engage in online political discourse tend to be younger college graduates. So things like student debt forgiveness.
That's because student debt is a new phenomenon since 1980. Prior to that, student colleges were either extremely affordable or free. The California system was totally free until Ronald Reagan was the governor. So of course it's going to be younger people. Because guess what? Student debt just started to explode. It's a new thing that neoliberals did.
Like, it speaks to them a lot because a lot of these people carry student loan debt. But when I look at like people that have debt and have graduated with a degree, like these people are massively out owning their high school graduate counterparts. These people are like, if we were to do any type of student debt forgiveness, it would be like a massively regressive distribution of wealth.
Yeah, it's totally fucking overblown debt, chat. Man, student debt really overblown. Well, here's a study from National Institutes of Health saying can't afford a baby, debt, and young Americans. We analyzed data from the National Longitudinal Study and find that for the generation coming of age in 2000s, student loans delay fertility for women, particularly at very high levels of debt. Home mortgages and credit card debt, in contrast, appear to be precursors to parenthood. These results indicate that different forms of debt have different implications for early adulthood transitions. Whereas consumer loans or home mortgages immediately increase access to consumption goods, there is often a significant delay between the accrual and realization of the benefits for student loans. The double-edged nature of debt as both barrier and facilitator to life transitions highlights the importance of looking at debt both as a monetary issue and also as a carrier of social meanings. With a decline in personal savings from 10% in the 1980s to less than 1% in the 2000s, America has moved from a nation of savers to a nation of borrowers. In the last decade, the net worth of households at the bottom 90% of wealth distribution declined, and by 2010, 25% of American households had a net worth of $50 or less. So, it's overblown, except wait, here's a study showing that it reduces fertility and people don't have children who want them because of their debt. Imagine being this out of touch. Now, if you're a rich fuck who never went to college and doesn't have student loan debt and became rich from playing StarCraft incompetently, maybe it doesn't seem relevant to you because it's not relevant to you. But for the rest of us who got an education and studied a book or two, it became relevant to us. He went to college for like a semester or something, and he dropped out.
To people that are already going to be the highest earners in society. It's going to be one of those issues where, unfortunately, we have like limited government and political will to get things done.
Yes,
so
Derek,
it's
this is
just going
what
to be
we're
a
doing
thing
now.
that you have to kind of like argue and fight for, that maybe there are better areas in society where the money could go towards. I don't think that
Okay, so he doesn't understand even the basics. We can forgive student loan debt without an additional appropriation of money. That money has already been appropriated to pay for people's school. What we're doing here is whether or not we take money back from people. We're not expending additional resources. We are forgiving a debt. If I lend you $100 and I call you up the next day and say, you know, that loan is no longer a gift, I don't have to go raise another $100. That $100 that I already gave you is already in your pocket. I don't need to go spend another $100 to forgive you. And that's all that it is. It's forgiving the debt. Now, you're right. For everybody who has student loans, they will now be in a better position than they were financially. Instead of them trying to figure out a way to pay off their $100,000 of student debt or $50,000 of student debt or $35,000 of student debt, they can now save for a down payment on a house, or they can save for retirement, or they could go on vacation. They could buy a car. They can remodel their house and put in a solar system. There's a million fucking things they could do. That's the power of money. Money equals freedom to people in our society. So this is just babble. How do people buy this shit? How do you watch this guy? I know there are Destiny's fans in the chat. Go ahead and explain to me how you watch someone who's so out of touch. I don't get it. He's wrong on the facts and he's just blatantly out of touch. Don't you have your own goddamn experiences? Unfortunately, they won't have the balls to say anything.
loan debt is like as much a drag as people say that it is. Like, I mean, it is kind of a drag, but literally all debt.
I am pro debt forgiveness, but as someone who has delayed things paying off debt, I would like to see some kind of credit, maybe with help in a lot of ways. Hey man, I would love to see people who paid off their loans get a tax credit for the money they paid. You're talking to somebody who is totally in favor of that. Aren't you being a little dishonest here? You don't have to raise more money, but you also won't get that money back. You won't have to spend it on somebody else. You're still out $100. Yes, I'm out $100, but that doesn't mean I need to spend the money. It doesn't. When I forgive you the loan, That money is forgiven. I don't have to raise new money. And that's the same thing that's happening. That's why Joe Biden can forgive student loan debt with an executive order, because the assets are under the executive branch's control. That's what, by the way, all that student loan debt, that 1.71 trillion we talked about, that's an asset for the federal government. And that federal government can rip it up. But it's already appropriated that money to give the student loans. What we do with the assets is up to us. It's like when I buy a computer, I can take a hammer to it. It's mine. I don't have to save another $10,000 to take a hammer to the computer. I can do whatever the fuck I want to it. That is, now you're saying we shouldn't forgive that debt because it's good that we profit off of student loans. And that's where you're going to have, now you're making an affirmative claim. I'm making an affirmative claim that student loan debt is bad. I just showed you a study that said that it's causing people to delay having children who want children, which lowers their fertility. It delays them on life transitions like buying their own home or moving out of their parents' house or consuming and growing the economy. You have to now prove to me why it's good that people have student loan debt. And you're going to find that impossible because there isn't any evidence that having student loan debt is good for you.
Debt is a drag. Like, you could forgive all credit card debt or forgive any type of debt and it would be less of a drag. But I think that in terms of like, if we wanted to give away like $1 trillion to society, I think it would be so much better to focus that on like working class people, or focus that like from a more bottom up approach rather than like targeting what are going to be like the highest and most successful people in society.
Wrong. You're wrong. We already established that 40% of student debt is people who didn't finish their degree, like you. You didn't finish your degree. If you hadn't gotten StarCraft, maybe you'd still own it. You'd still owe on it. So first of all, almost half of student loan debt is for people who are not benefiting from a degree. So you're wrong about that. Second of all, yes, some wealthy people, some people with higher incomes would get some debt forgiven. We can get that back from taxing them. We could get that back by taxing high income people. That's much more efficient than trying to micro-target forgiveness. And also, this is a middle-out economy, which means people making from, 0 percentile of income up to 80, 85% of income are all people who are worthwhile in assisting and aiding. So yeah, if you make in the 80th percentile of income, you're above average. But that doesn't mean that government shouldn't assist you. We're not playing a math game here, where we just say everybody above the 50th percentile is bad and everyone below is good. What we should be doing is looking at your lived experience, your quality of life, your development level. What does that mean? That means, do you have good housing? Do you have healthcare coverage? How is your transit? How is your leisure opportunities? How is your self-reported happiness? And maybe it takes transfers from people, even in this 80th percentile, get transfers to make sure that they live up to the level of quality of life that we want to ensure. So what? You can't just arbitrarily say, because someone's in the top 15% of income, they shouldn't get transfers because they're in the top 15%. No. We look at what do people need to have a dignified, happy life. And if that means people making 80% of the average 80th percentile don't have enough, they need services, then we provide them services. We also provide it for everyone below them. That's called a good society. And remember, distributions of wealth are not from God. It's based on how we design the economy. And right now, the wealthy are getting most of the gains from our economy because they've structured their incomes to avoid taxation. They structure their incomes so that they get assets through things like security appreciations, capital gains, asset price increases. That's why Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world paying zero taxes, because unless he sells his Amazon shares, he doesn't have a taxable event. But every week you collect a paycheck, you have a taxable event because your income is taxed, but his capital gain is not. So for us, that's why wealth is important to look at, because wealth is actually power within a capitalist society. The more wealth you have, the more control you exert over the economy. Income is just a measure of flow.
Anyway, basically, is kind of what I'm looking at.
Let's separate the political question for a moment, okay?
Sure.
I mean, because I think that there's
Man,
definitely...
if you took away my $100K in student debt, I'd be so insufferable on $22 an hour. I might, because I have a degree and it's so bourgeoisie, I might do something crazy like buy a 3-bedroom house or get a new car instead of one of those beaters. Also, what Destiny is not taking into consideration, which is so obvious if you're not stupid, because everybody who's thinking about going to school brings this up, which is, what if I don't get a good job? There's a bunch of people who are academically qualified, but they make the conservative decision not to go into debt and not to pursue an education because they know it's not guaranteed that they're going to get a good job in their degree. And they, because their family, for example, is poor, don't have a social safety net to save them if it goes bad. So they decide, even though I'm a qualified, well-qualified academic, I'm not going to go to school because I don't have that social safety net of my parents' basement to fall into. I need to work, and they just decide to avoid taking on the debt in the first place. If you don't have student loan debt, all those people who might pursue an education but for the debt pursue it. So right now, just the existence of student loans prevents people who otherwise would go to school and thrive not to go to school because they're making a conservative and prudent decision not to take on debt.
Some arguments, regarding how it plays out politically, and that sometimes can be very hypothetical.
Would I debate Pepe La D on this? I mean, he's going to say the same shit he's saying to Sam Seder. It's pointless.
The Democrats could be on the verge of passing $4 trillion worth of infrastructure spending, with the Republicans, complaining about critical race theories in kindergarten. I would be shocked.
Yeah.
So it's sort of hard to predict that. But I think.
Or I'm pausing too much, Chad. Sorry. Liberace Low, thanks for the prime.
Will receive the benefit of this is wrong. And the idea that it's regressive is also wrong. I mean, I think my sense is just from what you've just said in terms of that it's actually you have been blinded by the online discourse of it in terms of who you think is the receiver of this debt. Part of that, I think, is a function of the studies that came out in 2020 that showed that it was regressive when they looked at income and just the idea of looking at people about what they're going to make. And also a function of those studies as to what they actually looked at, I think has created some inaccurate perceptions. There was a study that just came out a month or two ago, I think it was, from the Roosevelt Institute by a couple of Princeton professors and a couple of professors from the university.
So, Chad, this is the same thing what I'm going to predict this, Chad. This is what happens when I had the last debate I had with Destiny was about Medicare for all. And I pointed out that The Lancet had just published a study from Yale epidemiologists about how Medicare for all would save 65,000 lives a year and save the country $600 billion per year in Medicare or medical expenditures. You heard that right. 65,000 deaths a year saved and prevented, and $650 billion saved. And he tried to go, they don't know anything about economics. Oh, God, The Lancet's a bad journal. And after that debate, he said, I'm never debating Mike from PA again. So Sam Seder bring out studies from the Roosevelt Institute. Here's what he's going to do. He's going to say the Roosevelt Institute is wrong, and he's going to pull up some sort of right-wing source, and it's going to be fucking stupid. And he's going to try to pretend like, oh, I totally am informed about the Roosevelt study. And he's going to spin himself in the ceiling because this study refutes his entire argument. And just so you know, chat, this factual study is a center-left position. This is not some sort of radical, online-only socialist position. This is Chuck Schumer's position. This is Democrat, base Democrat. You have a fucking beating heart. Center-left. This isn't like Bernie Sanders and Richard Wolff are doing weird Marxism.
Of California, I think it was Merced. And I have it here somewhere. And if you
That's
look
not me,
at
chat. That wasn't me.
wealth as opposed to household wealth, as opposed
Pepe
to
La D also says the Electoral College is good. He's dumb. Yeah, that was a debate. It's called The Secret Debate. It's on my YouTube channel, chat. One of the secret debates that I did with Destiny. was on that. He came onto my stream. You can go, and he tried to argue in favor of the Electoral College. He also tried to argue that it was a conspiracy theory to believe that Donald Trump's appointees to the EPA, namely Andrew Wheeler, a former coal lobbyist, was going to make the environment worse. He told me that I was a conspiracy theorist for believing that. Go watch the debate. You'll see why he's incredibly stupid.
Income. You will find, and if you break it down in terms of
Is it in the Winter POV
race,
playlist? I think so.
you will find that this is actually incredibly progressive, and it's in fact more progressive the more debt that you release.
And this is why, chat, by the way, whenever Destiny talks about me, he just tries to like insult me. He makes up stories and just like creates narratives that are just made up because he knows that he can't debate substantively. And so he's talking to Sam Seder here, and he's treating Sam Seder with respect because in the past he said Sam Seder was smart. So he would have to, and if he tried to treat Sam Seder with disrespect, like he would almost any other leftist, well, then he would be making himself look like an asshole because he said Sam Seder was smart in the past. So he has to do this kind of like low energy debate, or else he's contradicting himself. And Sam Seder is going to continually to bring up solid evidence, and you're going to see what Google Andy can throw up in response.
The studies that were released had some serious methodological, you could say, flaws.
He also defends
unless
Citizens
you were
United,
trying
yeah.
to get to a certain conclusion. But if you look at things like wealth, and you look at actually who holds the majority of this debt, you'll find that it's actually not, Brooklyn hipsters online. It's actually there's a huge percentage of this debt that's held by African Americans. Black people have much more difficulty in paying off this debt than white people and Asian people. In fact, I did an interview with a guy, with one of the professors of this, a guy named Wary, Frederick Wary, and it was pretty shocking, I have to say, because on some level I wasn't as concerned with the regressive nature as you might be, but I think I had a perception that was maybe somewhat similar to yours. After 20 years, white people have paid back 94% of their loans, college loans. Black student owes 95%. And a big part of this is because, and I'm sure you know that there is a serious wealth disparity. You could have, and even though we now know too from studies that similarly situated, black boys and white boys, when they get older, will, as adults, as men, will have an income disparities, even if presumably all the other factors are the same. There's such a massive wealth disparity between white people and black people in this country that any dollar made by a white person has far less claim to it than a dollar made by a black person. So you may need to help your parents. You may need to help other members of your family.
This is actually a very important point. This is what happens with higher income African Americans and Hispanic Americans is they don't come from generational wealth. So wealth, think of income like a hose, okay? So if you have, and your wealth is a big bucket, all right? If you have a lot of income, but your bucket has a whole bunch of holes in it, say like you're helping out your family, you're paying off debts, your bucket's gonna fill slower than someone with a slightly smaller pipe, but no holes in their bucket. All right? So income is actually, while income is indicative of what wealth may be over the long run, it isn't the same as wealth, because somebody who has a lot of wealth can also generate income from that, whereas somebody without any wealth but higher income has, they have to only earn that income through through labor. And so income is used to build wealth. It also funds consumption, and consumption levels differ from person to person. And so more income is correlated with more consumption. But wealth is the point. Wealth provides you with things like owning your own home, Wealth provides you with things like the ability to retire. Wealth provides you a social safety net so that if you have a disruption in income, you actually don't have a disaster, right? And so you have to take into account income as well as wealth to understand the actual financial position of a person or a business. This is so obvious, I don't even know what to say. Like, you all inherently get this. We all know this intuitively. If you have $1 million in the bank and you make $50,000 a year, you're in a more secure position than someone who makes $100,000 a year and $0 in the bank. Because if they lose their job, they get sick, the economy has a downturn, they're in a worse position than you. Now, over time, if they're allowed to build wealth, if the $100,000 remains fixed, eventually they're going to catch up to you, but it's going to take decades. And that's the position that African Americans are in. Even African Americans that make a higher income, they're starting from a position of having no safety net. And they're often required in their families to provide that social safety net. This is actually another important point. High income African Americans oftentimes don't live in the same communities that they grew up in. Whereas white people that transition from low income to higher income tend to move into wealthier communities, because the wealthier African Americans provide a safety net to their friends and relatives. This is all stuff that you kind of intuitively get. And if you come from a family that's a middle class family and they own their own home and they paid your student loans, and I come from a poor family where they didn't pay my loans and I took debt, right? We both quit. We both finish our schools. We get the same job at the same company with the same salary. In 10 years, you'll have a shit ton more wealth than me because you'll have saved for a down payment on a house and bought a house. You have saved for retirement, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, and your assets and your wealth and your savings and your investments will be compounding year over year. Whereas me, I'm paying down debt. And so after 10 years, even though we had the same education, the same job, the same skills, because your parents and your social safety net, or not social safety net, your social milieu provided you that money, you will have a much better wealth situation than me. And correspondingly, your kids will be in a better position than my kids. Even though we had the same job, the same skills, the same income, because you started off from 50 yards down the line, we're doing a 100-yard dash, you have a 50-yard head start, you're going to be in a better position. And that compounds generationally. This is the most basic equity knowledge that all of you already have. Similar situation to South Africa, it's called black tax. What happened to the bucket? And the same thing with the bucket, right? If your income comes in and it's diverted into paying a student loan, like half of my stream goes into paying a student loan and all of your stream goes right into your wealth bucket, you're going to become much better positioned economically very quickly. I had this happen to me to a T. My friend just stayed home and bought Bitcoin with his paychecks while I live paycheck to paycheck, same exact job and pay, exactly. Do you think that a certain degrees that have high earning potential like doctor, lawyer, engineer should not be forgiven, or just blanket forgiveness in total? Blanket forgiveness in total. Because if those people with high income have high income, we tax it. Not everybody who see, the thing about lawyer and JDs, for example, is like a Juris Doctorate is a bimodal degree. A large percentage of lawyers make a lot of money, but a lot of lawyers don't. A lot of lawyers make 50, 60, 70 grand a year, which is a solid income, but not if you owe $2,000 a month in student loans. And still, I mean, that's the basic stuff.
You
sorry for the long rant there.
Insofar as that you haven't had wealth passed down. So the reality is it's actually very progressive, and it becomes more progressive the more money you forgive, in part because Black people hold more debt, and low wealth families hold more debt. And the first $2,500 is deductible on your taxes.
Yeah. So I'm familiar with the Roosevelt study, and I feel like the methodology on this study is unbelievably flawed, like such that when I was reading it when it came out, because I've heard about how regressive debt relief is, and then when they come out, I was like, well, actually, it's incredibly progressive. I was curious, like, wow, that's a much different claim than what I've heard. But the way that they try to figure this out, I can't help but feel like they just desperately want to answer the question of like, how do we make it so that we can forgive student loans and make it sound progressive when it's not? I don't know why you would ever compare wealth as opposed to earnings to figure out if debt relief was a positive or a negative. Like somebody that has, so for an example, if we were to try to target some form of stimulus to somebody, you can have a person that's 75 and graduating with $200,000 in the bank, which is pretty bad if you're retiring at 75 with $200,000 in the bank. And you can compare them to somebody that just got out of med school. And we could argue that we should be stimulating the guy that just graduated with his medical degree because he has less wealth, maybe even a negative net worth compared to the older person. Wealth is largely a function of age.
Okay, he's a total imbecile. I'm sorry. So there's a great thing about the government is that we get to have what are known as multiple different programs. We don't have to solve all problems of inequality through each individual program. We get to do the student debt relief, and then we go, hey, how are retirees doing? How are young adults doing? How are children doing? And we go and we do a different program. That's the glory of government. We don't have to say, this student debt program isn't solving income and wealth inequality completely. Not worth doing.
Student loan debt is largely acquired in the earlier parts of your life. I have no idea why somebody would like conduct a study and argue for the progressivity of the forgiveness of student loans based on wealth when student loan debt is literally specifically taken on at the parts of your life where you have the least amount of wealth. And the people that are the wealthiest tend to be like...
Yes, that's a good point. Exactly. They have the least ability to pay. That's why it's stupid. You're giving people unsecured loans when they don't have an ability to pay back that debt. That's a highly risky loan, both for the borrower and for the person lending it, which is why you need federal government to do it, because it is an unsafe loan. Whereas if you give a loan to somebody with assets, you could always go and get the assets. That's why we shouldn't charge students money. There's a reason why. I mean, this is so idiotic, it's unbelievable. You could make the same argument about high school. Why do we have free high school? High school graduates make more than high school dropouts. That's income inequality. Fuck it. Let's start charging for high schools too. Let's start giving everybody student loans for high school. This is an arbitrary fucking line, but you've actually drawn a very good point. Students are people without assets. So this is a highly risky debt. So we'd have to have a really good justification for doing it in the form of a debt. And your justification is, well, they'll make more money in 10 years, or they'll make more money in 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and therefore it's progressive to do it, is stupid. Because not everybody with a degree will actually have an enhanced income. And not everybody who goes to school will finish. So why don't we just, I have an idea, tax the people with higher incomes? So if we pay for someone's school and they end up earning a higher income, guess what? We'll tax that higher income at a higher rate. That seems like a better solution.
Like at the end of their lifetime of earnings. There was actually one of the researchers that were cited in that Roosevelt Institute paper, Sylvain Catherine, because I was kind of looking around because their paper was cited a lot, and they echo much the same. There's like a big Twitter thread where they kind of talk about how the problems with doing this is that wealth is always going to be correlated with age versus income and earnings, which is really what you're looking for with a degree. A degree isn't about getting wealth. You don't get a big like jackpot reward when you get a degree. You get more earnings in the future, right? The net present value of a degree is pretty high. You mentioned the wealth disparity, and that's kind of like the thing that I'm interested in when we talk about like stimulus for a society. And I think that the problem with doing like student loan forgiveness...
Income is also correlated with age. Income goes up as you get older. And of course, we should tax the people with higher income and a more secure foundation because they can afford it versus someone without.
Is that the biggest driver? It sounds counterintuitive when you ask me like, what is the biggest driver of wealth inequality in society today? You know, usually people say Jeff Bezos or landlords or evil, blah, blah, blah. One of the biggest drivers of wealth disparity is actually college diplomas. Like a college degree nets you like a $20,000 average earning increase over somebody that doesn't have a college degree. And high school wages have been relative.
Okay, he's brain dead. He's absolutely brain dead. Somebody going from making $40,000 a year to $60,000 a year, that is not the driver of wealth inequality, you fucking dipshit. The overwhelming driver of wealth inequality is that the top 1% are massively increasing their wealth through asset appreciation. You fucking dum-dum. It's not their college degree. The top 1% of Americans wealthier than bottom 50%. The latest numbers show the top 1% has 16 times more wealth than the bottom 15% combined. That's roughly 34.23 trillion compared to 2.08 trillion. If you look at those trends over the long term, over the past 3 decades, we've seen a widening inequality, not just on wealth, but also income as well as wages. We've seen a lot of stagnation at median and below, middle class and below, and we've seen basically outstrip growth at the top. The Ayn Rand Institute says gap isn't the problem, poverty is. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ayn Rand Institute. Wow, they're literally just going to quote the Ayn Rand guy in this article? Holy shit, this must be... What the? This is PBS! The only expert they quote is from Ayn Rand Institute! All right, I'm going to find a different article. Holy shit. And by the way, chat, millennial generation is more educated than previous generations, yet their wealth is growing slower. It's not the college degree. This is just factually fucking wrong. Here you go. Here's a study. This is from Pew Research. Now that the youngest millennials are adults, how do they compare with those who were their age and generations that came before them? In general, they're better educated, a factor tied to employment and financial well-being, but there is a sharp divide between the economic fortunes of those who have a college education and those who don't. And when you look at this, the millennial generation has the most college degrees. Some college is 28, or excuse me. Okay, bachelor's degree and higher, 39%. Less than high school is 8%. High school graduate, 25%. If you actually look at this, the share of millennial women with bachelor's degree is now higher than that of men. Let me see if I could find you for this. Hold on. The economy varied for each generation. While the Great Recession affected Americans broadly, it created for a particularly challenging job market for millennials entering the workforce. The unemployment rate was especially high for America's youngest adults in the years after the recession, a reality that would impact millennials' future earnings and wealth. The individual earnings for young workers have remained mostly flat over the past 50 years. Similarly, the household income trends for young adults markedly diverge by education. As far as household wealth, millennials appear to have accumulated slightly less than older generations had at the same age. Millennials with a bachelor's degree had a median annual earnings of $56,000 in 2018, roughly equal to those of college-educated Generation X workers in 2011. Or excuse me, 2001. So this is the important point. The wages are completely flat. For 17 years, wages have been flat. What has a college costs since 2000? What are the college costs? This is 20 years of college growth. Oh my God, this chart is ugly. Okay, hold on. This is U.S. News and World Report. Let me see if I can show you this. So college tuition inflation, and this is regular inflation. So from 2000, so you can see from 1980, college tuition has gone up 1,184%, and overall inflation has 228%. So in other words, we're looking at around a 5.5 times the inflation rate of college tuition. And during that time, wages have remained flat. But for millennials with some college or less, annual earnings were lower than their counterparts in prior generations. So not only are millennials not making more than the previous generations, they're flat for a college degree, it's actually gone down for people without a college degree. So this actually is very important because it also shows you the necessity of getting a college degree overall in this economy. Millennials now own less than 5% of all U.S. wealth. Now, while it's not abnormal for older generations to be wealthier than younger generations, they have had longer to earn money and accumulate assets after all. The Fed's data also shows that millennials have far less wealth than boomers did at the same age. This is the important point. Yes, boomers have more wealth because they're older, but when they were our age, they had a higher share of the generation of the wealth in society. In 1989, when boomers were around the same age as millennials are today, they controlled 21% of the nation's wealth. Millennials controlled 4.6% of U.S. wealth. When boomers were our age, they controlled 21%.
Relatively stagnant as college wages increase and increase and increase. And you can see this over time.
That's not what happened. We just literally read that college-educated millennials are making the same as Gen Xers were 17 years ago. In my experience, when people argue against positions like this, it's not really ideological in the real sense of the world. It's because something about their identity is threatened by the idea. It offends or threatens their ego somehow. I mean, listen, I'm not going to do some sort of psychological fucking analysis of dumbass destiny.
Median wages for college degrees versus high school earnings. So the idea that we need to do targeted stimulus to give those specific groups of people money just because currently in life their wealth is low when you'd expect their wealth to be low. That Roosevelt Institute study I thought was really
their wealth is low because it's lower than previous generations who didn't have student debt. Baby boomers didn't have student loans. So we're actively seeing a transfer of wealth from a younger generation with less wealth to an older generation with more. That's the effect of student loans. And what is that doing? Preventing people from having children and moving on to like buying a house. Student loans delay fertility for women, particularly at very high levels of debt. In other words, you are literally ruining people's lives defending student loans.
Bad. I don't ever see why you would like try to graph against wealth.
I know Corey for Jester. He's just so, I'm sorry, just so stupid.
When I look at it that
so
way.
dumb, man.
Well, the reason why, I mean, it really gets to what's the purpose of this, right? I mean, we have a massive wealth disparity problem between black and white people in this country, and we know that black people disproportionately hold student debt. We also know that they have far lower graduation rates than white and Asian people. So the idea that they're even necessarily going to that they're even going to make the money that you presume is not necessarily the case. But this is why you would look at wealth as opposed to income, because if you're measuring progressivity in this sense, the idea is that
Dennis,
you want to help people who need the most help, right? And the question is, how do you measure that? If I am a black man who's 54 years old, my expenses relative to, my parents, relative to, maybe even the debt that I've had to take on because I have less of an ability to, baked into your assumption is that my income, my income potential is the same as a white person who has a degree, because the value of the degree, you need to look at race, which is why they specifically do this in this study. But every claim on my dollar is much more dramatic than it would be if I was a white person, because broad strokes, statistically speaking. Because
so what's happening here is he's Googling student loan debt. That's what's happening. This is what Destiny's doing. He's Googling student loan debt. What percentage of student debt is owned by white people?
Parents don't have as much money. And so they may need more help in their retirement than they would if I was white. That's just simply the case. And so when you're measuring this progressivity, the reason why you would look at wealth in this circumstance is because it's not enough to say, what's my earning potential going to be, even though it is less with my college degree than it would be for a white person. It is because there are more claims on my dollar if I'm to live a quality of life, right? Because we're not really just talking about money. We're talking about quality of life, your ability to care for the people around you, or the need to. And so, that is why you would look at wealth as opposed to income, because it's really not a question of just a number, right? It's a question of what you can do with that number. And if I have more claims, statistically I do if I'm black, because I have family members, I have parents, my responsibilities are greater to them. I don't have as much wealth in my house because it's been passed on, and my house is not worth as much, because that's just statistically the case. This is a function of, I'm sure of hundreds of years of of both institutional and governmental and societal issues that have created this wealth disparity. But the wealth disparity actually has real world implications. And that's why you would look at that and measure progressivity that way.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that there is wealth disparity. Absolutely. I just targeting student loan debt where a disproportionate amount of the debt is held by white people just seems like it's just going to...
It's disproportionately held by black people. 25% of student loan debt is held by black people. They're 13% of the population. That means they're disproportionately held by black people. Also, I got to tell you, I'm not as moved by the racial argument as just the fact that if you have student loan debt, you are necessarily not wealthy because you are, unless you're deciding that the 6-7% you're paying on your student loan is you have a better investment somewhere out there with your money where you can make more than 7% return per year. Good luck. You will pay off your student debts. So necessarily people with student debt are not wealthy. Maybe they have high relative income, but if all that income is being sucked up into a student debt payment, their lived experience, their actual consumption is not that of a wealthy person.
Grow that disparity. Like, I think the problem is we're looking at
but you're looking at it, and this is one of the other things.
He doesn't know what disproportionate means, apparently. Yeah.
You're looking at the pool of debt holders. But if you want to measure progressivity, you got to measure it across the course of the entire population. And black people represent about 13% of our population. They hold more than double than that. I think it's like 27, 28% of the student debt. And that is also a function of wealth disparity. And that's why they hold that much more debt relative to their population size. For instance, Ivy Leaguers, the amount of student debt, public student debt that is held by Ivy Leaguers is infinitesimally small. And that is because wealthy people, and I'm talking not within the pool of people who borrow money, but I'm talking in the pool of our society, of people who go to college. Wealthy people don't need loans in the way that people who don't have wealth need them. And you take out the loan based upon the wealth that you have and the wealth that your family has. And even if you project forward as to what the value of that's going to be in the future, the fact is for a disproportionate number of those people who take loans, it's going to be less than it would be for white people. But that's the basis in which you get a loan is based on wealth.
So I'm going to just explain my position on this. Education doesn't guarantee income. And we don't have to do this kind of like scuffed ass way of trying to do progressive policy where we're going to do what Destiny wants to do is what he's arguing for is a backdoor tax, which is let's not measure how much you actually make. Let's just charge you for your education and force you to pay that back no matter what your income is. That seems like an incredibly stupid way of doing it. How about this? We fund education for everyone so that everyone who is qualified gets that education. That actually increases our productivity. As Destiny points out, educated people are more productive, will produce more, which means higher incomes, right? Which means more wealth in society, which means more human capital available, which means more skills, which means we have better quality of life. And then we actually just tax the wealthier people. If you make a high income, then we tax that. Instead of doing an underhanded backward tax where we guess, well, you're probably going to do better because you have a college education. So we're going to force you to pay the money you do make into that irrespective of what you actually do earn in the future. That's absurd.
Right? I mean, not on income.
I understand that, but what I'm saying, what the problem is you're not helping to alleviate.
You can pay student loans based on your income level, not your degree. This is laughable. You're an idiot. I'm sorry. A student debt repayment based on income doesn't mean that your debts get paid down. They will allow you to pay a certain percentage of your income because they don't want you to get too poor. So income-based repayment programs don't actually pay down your student debt. They just allow you not to go delinquent and ruin your credit, but it still accumulates and goes up, and you end up owing more because interest is compounding. That's why a lot of people, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that, 8-bit Amos. Sorry for making me flip out because I've heard the phrase, people go, well, we have income-based repayment. That doesn't actually make your debt go down. Your debt goes up when you're in an income-based repayment program because interest compounds against the principal. So if you're not paying more than your interest is compounding, your debt actually goes up, even as you're making payments.
Any of the problems between the class of white people and the class of black people. All you're helping is wealthy black people further themselves from poor black people, and wealthy white people further themselves from poor white people. That the issue here is that, like, if we were talking about we need to do some sort of targeted stimulus to kind of close the gap between white wealth and black wealth, you would have to move out.
So this is the difference between me and Destiny. My goal isn't to close the gap necessarily, right? My goal is for every single human being in America to have a dignified life. Now, when you do that, that's going to disproportionately help black people because they've been disproportionately harmed in American society, and they have less access to wealth, less access to education, less access to healthcare. So if you provide universal healthcare, universal education, universal childcare, universal housing, when you start guaranteeing high quality public services, that's going to disproportionately help black people more than white people. But I think every human in America deserves to live a dignified life, white or black. Because I don't know if you know this, a lot of white people are living pretty shitty lives right now.
Side of an area where the vast majority of the debt is being held by white people. It might be that as a percentage of the debt held compared to the number of people there are, that like maybe black people hold more. But the reality is that as if you look at the whole pool of money and we were to forgive like big chunks of that pool of money or all of that pool of money, a vastly disproportionate amount of that wealth is going back into white people as opposed to black people.
He keeps saying disproportionate. It's not disproportionate. More money would flow to black people than white people by the share of the population, the pro rata share. It would be disproportionately helping black people. It would just also help some white people. But disproportionately, it would narrow the gap. It would make black people better off relative to white people if we forgave all student loan debt. He's just wrong.
Think that there's a problem with trying to shore up differences in wealth between the classes, between white people and black people, I'll say. But
just to explain it in case you're confused, proportionate would mean 13% of the population is black, 13% of the student debt would be black people. 76% of the population is white, 76% of the student debt is white. But if it's 60% of the student loan debt is white and 27% is black, then forgiving student loans would disproportionately help black people.
I think that that's impossible to do via just blanket forgiveness.
Dennis, that's
when it comes
a
to
lot.
student loans. If we were to talk about things like income-based repayment programs that are based on like the income that you're earning after school, I think that programs like this would do a way better job at targeting low-income people, which in this case oftentimes will be black workers, if they do have more claims on their dollar versus white workers. But just doing this like kind of like blanket forgiveness, I think it's like 60%.
Also, I can tell you this right now: when you target things to poor people, it becomes unpopular. It becomes stigmatized and it becomes unpopular. And I hate to inform you, Chad, but middle-class people vote more than poorer people right now. We already talked about the adverse selection problems that are associated with means-tested programs, but politically, this is also bad. It's just and also. We're not going to do a new program that passes through Congress. We could forgive student loan debt with executive order. We can't create some new weird means-tested neoliberal program.
Debt or whatever is held by people that are going for graduate degrees, a majority of these people of which are white. I don't think that you're ever closing gaps between white and black people by doing college education debt forgiveness. You're just growing the difference between poor black people and wealthy black people, or poor white people and wealthy white people.
That last part is not true. The fact of the matter is that this study is specifically
Chad, that's a big problem in our society. The wealthy black people. Yeah, Chad, that's it. Hey, we don't want wealthy black people to get too rich. That's a big problem in our society right now. Absurd.
Across not the pool of borrowers. Again, it is across the entire population. So, for instance, in this report, distribution of debt cancellation under the Warren Schumer plan. And they look at that because that's the most expensive one, right? That's the $50,000 one.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. This is all destiny.
Asset quintile has an even more progressive downward slope than we saw for all racial groups combined. White people in households in the top 10% would receive just an average, the top 10% of wealth, would receive an average of $648 in debt cancellation per person. And the biggest benefit is for people, white people in the households at the bottom 20%. This is across the population, right? This is the 20 percentile of the least wealthy white people in the country would receive an average of $2,700, $2,759 in debt cancellation. White people in households in the 20th to 40th percentile, almost $4,000. So there's 6 times as much as the top 10%. People in the bottom 20% would get 4 times as much debt relief as the top 10%. And it's a similar dynamic in the context of black people. So they're not looking at the assumption that rich black people go to college and take loans versus poor black people is wrong. It's just simply not what the data shows. I mean, it's an assumption that we make.
Destroyed. Utterly fucking destroyed. Utterly destroyed. Utterly destroyed. Is he going to acknowledge that his entire argument was just flattened? His entire argument was that forgiving student loans was going to help richer people more than poorer people. And Sam just gave by a quintile distribution of how it would actually go more to poorer people.
If you look into who's going to school, it is people who are not making money, particularly in black people. Like when you look at for-profit universities, which drives a lot of this of public loan debt, you've got older.
I don't know about that.
Particularly,
I don't know about that, Sam. I think you might be overselling that point. I think a lot of it is just regular university debt as well.
Women who are going because they have reached a threshold in their job.
We may have to speed this up, Jack, because every time Destiny talks, he says something wrong, and it just
to break through this.
Sam has a real fetish for humiliating Stevens in 4K. True. Pepela.
Very often it doesn't work out.
So,
but we're talking about who actually holds the debt.
Yeah, but again, all of this is like, and I see this on page 15 because I read over this last night. The problem is that all of this is still working on a function of household wealth, which I just think is wholly irrelevant to the conversation of student loan debt. So I could ask you a million.
That sentence right there should make him never ever utter another noise ever again. Wealth is what you use to pay off debt. Income, the only difference between income and wealth is income is stuff that's happening this year, and wealth is income that happened last year. If you have a remainder after all your expenses and consumption, that is your wealth. And you could use prior income on this year's consumption. Like, for example, going to school. Wealth is, of course, relevant. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Who could believe this?
Million questions related to doing stimulus, and in none of these circumstances would you ever agree that household wealth is an appropriate way to look at things. Like, if I want, let's say that I was...
First of all, he's just dead wrong. And this shows how completely out of touch he is. When you apply for programs like food stamps or SSI, they look at your wealth. You know how I know this? Because my grandmother had Alzheimer's. Her husband died suddenly of an embolism, and he was her carer. And so I had to go and handle it. And they owned a house, but they had gotten mortgages on it, reverse mortgages and shit like that. So I had to untangle all this. And it wasn't until her assets were run down completely that she was able to get Medicare and Medicaid. So she wasn't eligible for Medicaid. She had Medicare, but Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. So for her to get into a county nursing home, up here in Pennsylvania, a lot of there's nursing homes that are run by the government. The local government has a nursing home for every senior that lives in our county. So you'll never see a senior walking on the street in Pennsylvania who has Alzheimer's as that's homeless. Because once you are a senior in Pennsylvania, you get taken care of by our county nursing facilities, and they are 5-star rated facilities for the most part, run by unionized nurses and doctors. But in order for her to qualify for Medicare and Medicaid to cover her treatment at the county facility, she had to spend her assets down because they looked at her assets, not just her income. This is how we do things when we run programs. So he's just wrong that assets are irrelevant. Of course they're relevant. If Jeff Bezos quits tomorrow, he would have no income, but he would have $200 billion in assets. Does anybody think that we should target student loan debt to Jeff Bezos if he went to school and borrowed money because he didn't have income as an executive anymore? He just had his irrelevant $200 billion in assets. How dumb.
Going to means test a $5,000 stimulus check, and I could give
people
it to
talk out of their ass
house.
about getting disability in programs. Meanwhile, I'm poor as shit, and I got rejected for food stamps twice, and in order to get disability, I can't have more than $2,000 in my savings account. Exactly.
Household with a wealth of $200,000 that comprises two 63-year-old senior citizens just starting to collect Social Security, or a household that has like a net value of negative $50,000, and it's a guy that just graduated with a law degree or with a PhD or a medical degree or whatever. We're never, ever, ever, ever in any other part of society looking at household wealth to determine who should be stimulated.
Wrong.
It is
Wrong.
I truly
He's
can't.
just totally wrong. In fact, we actually targeted more stimulus to people with more household wealth in the coronavirus relief package or with the PPP program. If you had a business that was worth multiple millions of dollars that employed lots of people, you had access to more stimulus than people who just had a regular job. What is he talking about? We do this all the time.
Think of any other part of society, because you're always looking at earnings potential. You're looking at like what is their lifetime.
We don't
earnings.
look at earnings potential when we do programs. We look at your actual income. The only time we look at earnings potential is retroactively. For example, when you get a divorce, we look at your retroactive earnings to determine alimony. This is something Destiny might know because I think he got a divorce. So they look at your previous years of income when you pay alimony. Because some people try to do this thing where they lower their income during the year they're getting a divorce so that they, don't have as much to give to their spouse that they now hate. So as a victim of divorce court, I'm surprised he doesn't know this.
Earnings potential, or what is their future earnings potential? These questions are always going to guide the conversation better rather than...
We're doing that with the child... We're doing that in some fashion with the child income tax credit, aren't we?
No, absolutely. That's exactly. It's only based on income. That's how that.
No, it's also based on having a child. So it's also based upon the expenses that are associated with having a family.
Well,
you get more if you have more kids, is what Sam is trying to explain.
For the child, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'm just talking about the broad principle here. I mean, because we don't have, in the broad principle here is that the expenses associated with where you're situated have an impact as to whether you qualify for this, right? If you have kids, you get this money. If you don't have kids, you don't, because theoretically your burdens are less.
Yeah.
Well, conceptually speaking, if you have a cohort of people, in this instance, black people, who have less intergenerational wealth, and they have and the same responsibilities, the claim on each dollar, and because we're talking about something different really than actually like providing a stimulus, we're providing debt relief. The claim on each dollar, every time that dollar comes in, there's less room to build assets with it. And so if you have a lawyer who has $50,000, a white person who has $50,000 worth of debt, statistically speaking, they're going to be able to build assets far quicker than a black person exactly the same situated, because statistically speaking, that black person has far more claims on their dollar because their parents don't have money, because they don't have the assets that already begin there. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Okay, so like, So firstly, to be clear with the child tax credit, the amount that you get is actually based on your adjusted gross income. Your AGI, when you file your taxes, is going to determine your...
Well, no, the primary indicator is if you have children.
It is, but then how much money you get is somebody that has a kid and files taxes.
Somebody
right?
who makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year is not qualified. I think what was the phase out, like literal top 1%? It's a universal. It's large. It's practically a universal program. It's practically a universal program, and you get more the more kids you have.
Because we have this on Who Claims with Shell or whatever, right? Is you have like a modified adjusted gross income. That's what determines the amount of payback that you get.
Yes.
No,
number one.
No, the amount of kids you have is the primary determinant. And if you make a shit ton of money, I think it's $300,000, right? Then it starts to taper. 75K, 150 is when it starts to taper, and it ends at 300, right? Something like that.
So when we talk about like who has the wealth to pay for college, wealth that you have at different stages in your life, I don't think is necessarily the same. So a common argument that conservatives will use or something is like, Bernie Sanders is a millionaire, Well, why is it that when we say that like an 80-year-old or whatever is a millionaire, why does that hit a little different than if you're a millionaire like when you're 30, right? Having $1 million when you're 75 years old, or having some decent level of household wealth when you're 75, 80 years old is way different than having even a fraction of that when you're younger, because you have the ability to earn so much more going forward. Like I guess we're kind of stuck. Like there's just the current wealth that you have is just such an irrelevant thing.
As we talked about in the previous, millennials only have 5% of the wealth in society at this point. And in 1989, when boomers were the same age as they are now, as millennials are now, they had nearly 20% of societal wealth. So student loan debt has actually destroyed the wealth generation of the millennial generation. And it is also, in another study we looked at, causing people to delay having children. Student loans delay fertility for women. And barrier to life transitions, which is obvious if you're not an idiot.
Like you have to factor in like age and then future earnings potential to figure out like where is the true health. Like if you want to
don't know what that is. We actually don't know what your future earnings potential is. We don't know that. Things change over time. We can make projections and guesses, but it's all backward looking. The value of a college degree is backward looking. And we know for millennials, it's worth less than it was for boomers.
More fair comparison, I think it would be like the lifetime average earnings and then the wealth at the end versus just your present wealth. Because somebody that's 70 years old that has $250,000 is not going to have the same amount of money as somebody that's 32, has a law degree, or just graduated as a doctor,
there's
and
30
currently has
minutes
a
left on
negative
this
net
debate,
worth
chat.
because of
There's
loans.
30 minutes
By the
left
time
on the
they're in
debate.
their 70s or 80s, they're going to be worth
We're going to try not to
tens of
pause.
millions, maybe,
I'll try not to
depending on
pause.
their investments.
Well, exactly. But the reality is that for black people, those numbers are less, even if they have the same, even if they are similarly situated. They graduate from the same college, they have the same degree, they're going to make less, A, and B, the way that they invest, they have less opportunity. Why? Because when blacks own a home, it will increase in value at a far less, it will grow far less over the course of that person's life than white people. That's just the fact, because of the nature of, of racism and of legacy of racism. The ability of, so when we talk about wealth disparity, we're including those 70-year-old black people, and we're including those 70-year-old white people. That disparity exists. It exists throughout the entire age brackets, everywhere, and it doesn't even out at one point. Black people don't catch up as a broad cohort. It's just the fact of the matter, and this actually, debt forgiveness would help on some level, because it would give a greater opportunity. Because look, here's the difference. If your parents are wealthy and you need to take debt,
I thought this could go up there, but it doesn't.
At the end of their life, you have a better opportunity of inheriting money, which gives you less of a pressure on having to invest and build assets. B, you don't have to take care of them, so you can dedicate more of your income towards building assets, investing, doing whatever it is. You're also white. Your opportunity to buy a house and be in your parents' house is going to have more value than they would if they're black. I mean, that's why it makes a difference. Why the assumption that the wealth is going to grow over the course of those 50 years or whatever it is just, it's an assumption that is not borne out by the data. You just don't have the same opportunity to build assets, regardless of what your projected income is, because even the projected income you're talking about is, you have to disaggregate it because you're not getting the clear picture.
I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of the things that you're saying.
No, I haven't. This is the first time I'm watching this.
2008 housing crisis is a really good example of a lot of like household wealth being wiped out and then being recovered in the aggregate. But when you break it down, white households recovered and a lot of black households still haven't come back from that. I don't disagree with any of that. I think that there are so many better ways. And this is actually, I guess this is kind of like the foundation of what I kind of wanted to talk about at the beginning. If we want
basically, Destiny doesn't want people with student loan debt to get it forgiven because he doesn't have student loan debt, because he won the Twitch lottery and went from cleaning carpets to streaming semi-pro StarCraft. And so he thinks that student loans should not be forgiven because it doesn't apply to him. It doesn't help him. And he's rationalizing this into a bunch of terrible arguments that are factually and empirically wrong. That's the root of the disagreement. Now, Sam Seder is an adult man, and he is looking at the data, including studies by the Roosevelt Institute saying that canceling student debt is progressive. He's looking at studies that show that student debt is causing millennials to delay their fertility and life transitions. He's looking at information that millennial wealth is only 5% of society's wealth at this point, whereas for baby boomers, they owned, when they were our age, they own 20% of the wealth in society. And just saying the root of that is all student loans, which is something that was developed and began in the 80s with neoliberalism. And student loan debt growth is the direct result of neoliberal policy. And it's causing serious damage to income and wealth inequality in this country, or it's causing income and wealth inequality.
Wanted to help working class communities, or even more specifically, if we wanted to help black communities, or we wanted to try to bridge the gap.
You're doing the eco analysis on D I asked for you earlier.
It feels like there are
so
many better ways that we could target stimulus or money to those communities. Even, I wouldn't suggest this because obviously it would be a huge political loser, but even like a black student loan debt forgiveness would be way better than what we're talking about right now, which is pumping $1 trillion into, or 1.7, I guess now, into student debt forgiveness, when so much of that is just going to white people that are already going to be earning so much more going forward.
Tax them then. It's fine. We could just tax them. We could just have taxes on those people. And so what?
Being part of the like managerial.
And again, one more time, we don't have to spend any money. There's no money being expended. It's not going to change the budget. We don't have to tax it. It's just a one-time forgiveness. And then it costs $60 billion a year, I think, to keep student debt at zero for public colleges and universities.
Elite class of like 4-year degree holders in the United States.
Well, one, we're not talking about expending $1.7 trillion because the actual expenditure, I mean, a lot of that is interest, right? I mean, that's just accruing in interest. I mean, it's not money that we ever expended in any way. So, I mean, and now you're getting more into like
boosted Lionheart.
The political argument
of it.
Welcome
back.
Which I think, maybe,
I feel like the term neoliberalism is a catch-all term here. I know we hate the libs, but you skip a lot of the explanation when you say this has been happening since the 80s because of neolibs. Oh, okay, I'll explain it to you more. Basically, neoliberal economists by the name of James Buchanan from the University of Virginia wanted to create a disciplining factor in colleges and universities. He felt that the movements of the 60s and 70s were rooted in radical leftist activism in university, and that the fact that students could attend and learn and agitate without getting debt would mean that they were not sufficiently disciplined by economic realities. So he helped innovate in the idea of student loan debt, which would force students to focus less on the collegial atmosphere and knowledge-seeking aspects of getting an education, and more closely cleave to vocational necessity. And they would have debt hang over their heads, which would force them to comply and conform more to the economic needs of capital. Therefore, for example, for most boomers, college was free. The University of California system did not start charging tuition until Ronald Reagan, the neoliberal. So you have a combination of right-wing economists and right-wing movements, and that was a coalition in reaction to the New Deal coalition and the Democratic Party dominance following the Great Depression that lasted all the way until 1980 in the Ronald Reagan Revolution, conservative revolution. The liberals and the post-New Deal coalition dominated American politics. The Democratic Party controlled the House for 34 of 38 years in that period. And so when we talk about neoliberals, we're talking about a way of taking something that wasn't commodified, which was a college education, and transitioning it to having it be under the control of capital. And student loans were used to discipline people and force them to consider the economic implications of all their education and force them away from seeking reforms to larger society. So we had that kind of if you want to read more, there's a book called Democracy in Chains by Nancy McLean, who's a history professor from Duke University. I really recommend it. There's another book called Dark Money by Jane Mayer. I would recommend you read that if you want to learn more about some of the topics that I'm talking about. So when I say neoliberal, what I'm talking about is a very specific, intentional movement that was created in order to stamp down on push from organized labor, students, young people, academia to reform capitalism, to make it more equitable, and to constrain the power of the wealthy in society. Another recommended reading would be the Powell Memo. I would recommend you look and read into that. Any other questions?
Maybe more problematic, but and I think that like maybe Medicare for all would be better for.
I'm sorry for getting irritated, but people are like, neoliberal, that's just a buzzword. No, I'm using it in the correct academic term to describe a specific phenomenon that took place in America. And the results are what we're seeing today, which is the utter destruction of the middle class and a concentration of wealth at the very top, and ballooning student debt, which is exploding.
Black people, but it's far more expensive on a I don't have necessarily a problem with that, but I don't think that this is
Democracy in chains.
It's not clear to me that
I should
in
really
the absence of Joe Biden, let's say, by executive action, saying I'm going to forgive this debt, that it's foreclosing the opportunity for anything else. I mean, I would argue that maybe on some level it could create political.
Yeah, I'll put a link for the book. Here's one of the books
momentum
you should check
to
out.
actually do more. I mean, that's debatable, but I think it's debatable. At this point, I mean, I don't. The hypothetical alternative that you're talking about, I don't know what that hypothetical alternative is.
Well, I think something like income-based repayment or something like that, I think would be a way better, rather than just giving so much. It's just, when I try to think of like student debt forgiveness, I guess if you're talking about like getting rid of interest or whatever, you just look at like the money owed.
Who do you think is taking these loans? Do you think wealthy white people are?
Yeah, they could, sure.
Well, I mean, they could take public loans, but they're not.
All I know is that like 60% of all the student loan debt is held by white people, and it's like 20.
And that's less than their share of the population. 76.13% of the population is white, and they own 60% of the debt. That means they own less than their share. That means they have disproportionately less share of the debt. Also, white doesn't mean rich. White privilege exists, but it doesn't mean rich. Most white people are poor.
25% is held by black people. Now, we can fudge that and look at like household wealth to try to like massage these numbers better. But if I was to give $1 trillion back to society, I don't want 60% of that going to white people that are going to be doing just fine because they have college degree.
Again, 40% of student debt is with people without a degree. 40% of borrowers with student loan debt did finish their degree. So 40% of that 1.7 trillion is people who don't have a degree. It's disproportionately going to people without a degree and to black people. And he thinks that it's it's going to people with debt.
Well, no,
like
but
that's
no,
just so much wasted money. Like, especially because you're talking about growing wealth inequality, which we are between college educated people and high school educated, and you're growing inequality between white and black people because
dumb.
the
I think
majority of this
I'll
wealth,
trust
60%
Peter
will
for
be
a
going to
second.
white
I
people,
need to
even if
stretch.
like as a percentage of the race, like maybe black people getting more. Like that's just there are just so many better ways to target stimulus to those communities than just giving white people who are already like in the upper echelon of society so much more
but they're
money.
not already up in the echelon. You're saying that you're anticipating that their college degree will necessarily get them there. I mean, all I can tell you is that when you've got the president, the former president of the U.S. Association of Home Builders was saying even up like 3 or 4 years ago, the number one block to new housing starts was college debt. We're seeing this is a generation too that we're talking about now, but we're talking about now that are earning far less than people who are building these assets that you're using these numbers against. Baby boomers and Gen Xers, their opportunity to build those assets is less, and if you're saying this is a scarcity argument, I mean, if there's something, wrong in and of itself with the policy, that's one thing. But I mean, if you're saying it's a scarcity argument, I just don't see that. I mean, like I said, like the concept that we were doing a $4.5 trillion infrastructure bill, which I think could very well happen.
D's comments on "we can fudge that massage" in reference to more details about the data goes to show he uses a very bland data numbers to help his narrative when the details of the data are important to know. That's because he has the conclusion, I want to be against student loan debt because lefties are for it. And then he just kind of grabastically, he does the same thing that creationists do. All right. Or people that argue in favor of intelligent design or trickle down economics or whatever other debunked theory of the right, which is, I want to say student loan debt forgiveness is bad because lefties and poor people want it and middle class people want it. I don't have student loan debt, so it doesn't help me. And he's a self-admitted egoist. His position is, I want to do things in society that help me. He said that blatantly. So obviously he doesn't have student loan debt. He doesn't give a shit that you can't afford a house because it doesn't apply to him. He doesn't need a degree. He's convinced people to watch him because he was toxic when he was losing at StarCraft. And they found it funny 10 years ago and he just kept streaming. But other than that, like, he doesn't need a degree. All right? So obviously he's bad faith.
3 years ago, I think was sort of hard to imagine. I mean, look, let's put it this way. From a political standpoint, like, how much are we collecting right now in student debt?
Like, what are the monthly or what are the yearly payments to the federal government?
Yeah, like what
It's
are we
about $70 billion, I think.
Right now, we're collecting nothing. And we haven't collected any of it for by the time September, when this thing is up, the moratorium is up, we haven't accrued interest or collected anything in over a year and a half.
Sure.
And you hear nothing about that. And so as a political matter, I'm just not convinced that it has the salience that people says. I mean, it is, I don't think that we should do this.
But why is their chat so stupid? Why is this chat so stupid? Why are they asking question marks? Why are they dumb? I just noticed his chat asking question marks. The salience of that is student loans are not necessary for the functioning of our government. They are not doing anything positive. The economy is not hurt when we don't collect student loans. In fact, the economy has been helped by us not collecting student loans. That's why they stopped collecting them, because they were trying to stimulate the economy. And guess what? It was a good thing. It was a good idea, and it's working well. Let's just make it permanent.
I'm just not convinced that there's a either or choice here. This is one of the few things that Biden will have an opportunity to do unilaterally that could have this type of impact. None of the other policies that we're talking about are something that he could do unilaterally.
Yeah,
I don't know. And so, I'm not sure I would do it now if I was him. I think I would extend the moratorium.
Don't worry. See, in Destiny's fantasy centrist universe, the Republicans are coming across the aisle to help us relieve student loan debt. Except, like Destiny, Republicans know that college-educated people are voting Democrat more and more. So they want to do everything they can to fuck over college-educated voters and also prevent as many people as possible from getting college degrees, which is what they're doing right now.
And push it into next year after the last bite at the reconciliation apple that we have. But then you're talking about a policy.
If it's as simple as a pen stroke, why doesn't Joe Biden do it? Because Joe Biden has the same politics as Destiny. That's why. He just doesn't want to. That's why we said vote Bernie Sanders and not Joe Biden.
Like, he can do unilateral.
Actually, that's unfair to Joe Biden. Joe Biden is clearly to the left of Destiny. But on this specific issue, they're the same.
And I don't know what else could have
These viewers don't realize that the pandemic froze student loan payments because none of the viewers have student loan payments because they're all children. Oh, that's a good point.
That stimulative
That's actually
effect,
a really good
also
point.
the help in terms of allowing a black middle class to gain some ground in terms of the wealth disparity and the creation and expansion of a black middle class.
Here's the thing. Destiny pretends to care about poor people, but he opposes every program that would help them. Medicare for all overwhelmingly helps working poor people. Student debt relief overwhelmingly helps middle class and working class people. Public housing, rent control, that overwhelmingly helps poor people, renters. He's opposed to all those. Every program that actually is something that would disproportionately help the poor, he's against. So it's bullshit when he's like, I don't want to help those rich people.
Because I think a lot of those folks are
What
not
am I eating?
There yet. That's why you take a loan.
Sure. So there's a couple things. There's a couple things. So I know that there are statements from that from I don't remember his name about how student loan debt is preventing people from
vegan.
It's like the number one blockade between a millennial and getting a house. But I think that when people go back and they study that issue, I wish I had this offhand. I had this last night. But we know this anecdotally. The number one issue with millennials is that we all entered the job market in 2007, 2008, 2009. It was during the Great Recession, and that had a massive impact on our ability to get paid to get a house.
Argues in favor of student debt relief as well. What? It works really well.
I remember just anecdotally, I was working at a casino at the time, and I remember that the 401k matches were good.
Yeah,
the cafeteria had hot food every day. They were
overly sweet
there were
sour
so
ring.
many different bonuses, and all of that got stripped away. And I don't remember any of it coming back when the economy started to pick back up again. Because if they can take it, they can keep it. But so I don't believe that just giving all that money back. I think that the one that I was looking back last night, it was for every $10,000 in student debt or whatever, there was a 2% blockade from getting a house. It might be preventing some people from buying houses a little bit sooner, but it's hard to talk about houses because so much else is going on with them. For instance,
it's not just preventing people from getting houses. It's preventing people from having children. It's preventing people from other life transitions. Now, this is just science, so I don't know. Many of the key transitions in life occur relatively early, at the earliest stages of adulthood. For this reason, successful early life transitions are particularly important to one's life trajectory, and the study of those transitions has emerged as a major focus in sociology and social sciences. Debt may be particularly influential in the early stages of an adult life course. For many youth, the late teens to mid-20s are a time of growing demand for spending, education, developing the resources for first jobs, and on setting up independent households. But slow growth in income, debt may interfere with more important work in enabling and constraining key transitions like fertility in the early years and later when financial lives may have become more secure. Conceptually, debt is most likely to exert shorter-term effects on the timing of large life decisions like fertility. It is unlikely that indebtedness would be significantly large for most, significantly change the decision to have children at all, but may affect the timing of fertility. Indeed, even factors like class and race have large effects on fertility. But given that debt is likely to have relatively short-term effects, it's especially important to study its influence on early fertility when a cohort is transitioning. If we looked only at older ages or completed fertility, we would miss those factors. So in other words, student debt is literally stopping people from owning homes and having children. And we're seeing U.S. fertility drop. U.S. birth and fertility rates dropped to a record low. Overall, the number of births declined 3% for Hispanic women, 4% for white and black women. Birth rates among women aged 20 to 24 and 25 to 29 dipped by 6% and 4%, both to record lows. Some experts say a decline in birth rates could represent a lack of vital resources like housing and food among those demographics, whose correlations between the rise in unemployment rates and decline in birth rates. So we have like that direct evidence.
Right now, like the price of housing is soaring ridiculously. If we compare how easy it was to get a house now versus a decade and a half ago, well, in 2005, your little brother that's like 19 years old and cuts grass can get a house because literally anybody will write him a loan to buy a house. It's really hard to make those comparisons.
Well, I think that supports my argument because I can tell you this: the price of college and the amount of debt. This debt is not something that has been a part of American life for even 25 years.
Drink that
this
soylent,
debt
boy.
has grown exponentially over the past 10, 15, 20 years. Tops. The price of college has gone up 4 times in 35 years. And I can tell you, that's when I went to college. I went to college 35 years ago. And so the argument that you're making, this is targeted when we talk about student debt largely on that cohort of people that you're talking about. Everybody who has, graduated in the wake of the recession. So all of those problems that you're talking about, you can either say it's this may not be the primary reason in which there are less housing starts. There may also be because there's
less education for your buck. College tuition inflation versus overall inflation. This is from 1980 to today. You can see that exponential bend happening at around 2000. That means that college tuition is increasing much faster in cost than other aspects of the economy.
There's less the income trajectory has flattened too for these generation of people, but these are the people who need that type of relief, and it's targeted in that way.
Again, I don't think the income trajectory is flattened. I think it's higher than ever. I think that's one of the reasons.
What? Obvious. Oh my God, he's so stupid. He's so dumb. We have seen income for people that are not in the top flatline. People who have a college degree have seen their incomes largely flat.
Reasons why when we say that the debt is growing more and more and more, well, that's because 40 years ago you didn't necessarily need a college degree to make it in the economy. Now,
40 years ago, college was free. When did the University of California system start charging tuition? 1985. So 40 years ago, it was fucking free. According to a New York Times article from 1982, during his 8 years as governor, Reagan fought hard in the legislature to impose tuition at four-year colleges. However, the legislature agreed to increase student registration fees. Annual tuition at UC schools reached nearly $5,200 for non-residential students at $1,326 for California residents. In other words, 40 fucking years ago, it was free. That's why we didn't have student debt.
Nowadays, that requirement is becoming higher and higher and higher. So, of course, you're seeing the student debt growing because more people are taking out money for a degree, but that's because
they have to. Because it was free before. And yes, more people are getting out a degree because college education is becoming more necessary in our increasingly sophisticated society. That's a good thing. Sort of like high school became a requirement. Literacy became a requirement with the Industrial Revolution. Well, if college becomes a requirement for a good job in the information age, that's good. And we should raise the bar for the minimum. Doesn't mean that everybody needs to get a college degree, but everyone who wants one should be able to get one. It doesn't cost that much, folks. It's not that expensive.
The net present value of those degrees has just increased over time, and it's becoming one of these.
People presume that.
People can say that they presume it, and people can cry on Reddit or whatever all they want, but people in the real world know. You know that if you only have a high school degree, if you don't have training, specialty for like an electrician or a plumber, like in the trades, like you are doing, even if we break it out into the 25th and 75th percentile of median earners, even that lower 25th percentile of people that have those 4-year degrees. So this is our gender studies, English, whatever people want to make fun of, even those people are making more money than somebody with just a high school graduation.
Well, that's always been the case because it's a credential. Of course, people with a credential are going to make more money than people without a credential. But that has nothing to do with outcomes in society, like your ability to own a home, your ability to start a family, your self-reported happiness versus your anxiety and depression. We're seeing lower fertility. We're seeing later people leaving their houses at a later age. We're seeing lower wealth. We can literally see the effects. This is not just people complaining. You can actually see the harm actively being done to our society. God, he's so stupid.
And like
when you break
out
out those numbers racially, though, it doesn't add up in that way.
When you break out the numbers racially, yeah, there's still a disparity.
But who cares? Honestly, this doesn't matter. This is an argument to having more people get college degrees, not less. If college degrees enhance your earnings potential and productivity, then we should lower the barriers to getting a college degree, like, I don't know, charging tuition. We should be encouraging as many people as have the aptitude to go to college. If college increases your earning potential, and then we'll make it up on the back end by raising taxes on wealthier people and higher income people. This is brain dead. His argument is actually reverse. Oh, college people make more, therefore we shouldn't support people going to college, is stupid.
That disparity starts to shrink when you look at the difference between like a black earner with a 4-year degree and a white earner with a 4-year degree versus like a black earner with just a high school education and a white earner with a high school education. It doesn't disappear completely, but like getting a 4-year degree is one of the few ways that like...
It doesn't matter. This is irrelevant. Nobody's saying that colleges aren't an income enhancer generally. Of course they are. But what we're talking about is a very specific program that is 25 years old of charging people outrageous tuition and cannibalizing their income when they're young adults. It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. It lowers people's ability to start themselves and their lives. It's a bad policy.
People are able to kind of catch up in terms of why they're not completely, of course, but it helps.
If everyone goes to college, then my computer science degree becomes even more worthless. Lump of labor fallacy.
Would you
Everybody learning to read makes my job as a clerk less valuable. Well, here's the thing. Everyone learning to read and write might make your medieval clerk job less valuable, but as you can see, society develops faster in ways that are unpredictable. The more education, the more people reaching their potentials, there's all sorts of new businesses and new ideas that might develop that we can never account for in the planning stage because we don't know.
Leave all college debt by people who haven't graduated, or would you have a problem with that?
Yeah, no, I think there's a separate discussion because those people don't have any of the benefits of like that college
degree. 40% of college debt.
Like, I think it's fair to say that, like,
scribes
if you
against
haven't graduated,
mass literacy, exactly.
Then either a percentage or all of that gets forgiven because you're not reaping the rewards of it. I don't like the idea that, like, you know, like the top 40% income households have 60% of the debt, and the lowest income 40% of those households have 20% of the debt. That just doing like a big stimulus and giving money back to people that have college degrees is just like, these are. I feel like. So to be a little personal, I'm somebody that has always hated the middle class because before I started making money online, I was working class. And as a working class person, the life that you live, like
almost 40%
actually
of
living
borrowers
paycheck
of
to
student debt
paycheck
didn't finish their
versus
degree.
like what
What do you mean? Why are you saying I'm wrong? It's right here in the PolitiFact. Mostly true. .6% of people who took out student loans in that 6-year span did not complete their college education in that period. It's 40% of people who took debt didn't finish a degree. It's not 40%. That's 40% of the debt. That's the same thing. 40% of borrowers didn't finish their degree. So it may not be 40% of the debt. Okay, I get what you're saying. 40% of the people who own student loan debt didn't forget their degree, but the value, you're right, the value might be different. The value, it might be more of the value is with people who did finish their degree, but still a significant portion of student loan debt holders are people without a degree, 40% of the holders. So thank you. You're right.
Middle class person deals with, where it's like, oh no, like I've got to pay $500 a month on my student loan.
You're right.
It's going to take me a while. Meanwhile, I've got a nice apartment. I've got 2 cars for my family. I've got like I don't think that those are the people that need the most help in society. Like people that are getting jobs as like computer programmers and nurses and all that. I don't think they need the help. I think that this is one of the things I like the most about like how Biden has been approaching stimulus, rather than the Trump top down. It's literally like, are you poor? Are you working? Do you have a child? Is your gross income low? You're going to be the one that gets the money. And that's like the kind of stimulus.
That's actually not even really what he's doing. He's just, see, Destiny's a dumbass. For example, the stimulus checks went to almost everyone. If you're making a $200,000 household income, that's a very small percentage of people in America. Here's the deal. Everybody who makes more than $400,000 a year doesn't get student debt relief. Deal.
That one has a super high like multiplicative effect when it goes through society, because these people spend money. They're not hoarding it. They're not sitting on it or just like putting it in their Vanguard account, right? And 2, because these people are the ones where it's like I can tell you like $1,000 to me as a carpet cleaner means infinitely more than $1,000 to a guy that just took his bar exam. I don't care if he's black, white, Hispanic, or whatever. Like that money is just so much.
It would depend upon whether that bar examiner guy has a job offer or not. And many people who take the bar don't. It would depend. Just having a law degree doesn't mean that you make a lot of money. This is a very false and literally shows someone who's never gotten an education.
Much more valuable going into working with people. And if you have that degree, it's as good as gold. It really is so important. I know we like to mean that it's not, but we can look at a million different stats. You will never, ever, ever find a stat that shows that you're going to be worse off getting a college degree than not. The earnings of high school workers are lower and lower and lower. That productivity is not growing. Those earnings aren't growing. And the earnings of anybody with a
higher education, college still pays off, but not for everyone. Higher education degree boosts wages for most people. A growing subset of graduates aren't seeing a return on their investment. Investing in a college degree still pays off for most students with higher salaries and greater wealth. Tax those people. But in recent years, it's become riskier, splitting graduates more widely into haves and have-nots. It's just not been the blanket guarantee of following the same path to prosperity that the earlier generations followed, said economically illiterate economist William Edmonds of the St. Louis Federal Reserve. First, the wages of college graduates have remained mostly flat this century after inflation. Second, the cost of attending college has soared. Third, even with higher salaries, significant numbers of college graduates in recent years are failing to build the kind of wealth that previous generations did. Boom, boom, boom. Everything Destiny just said is fucking wrong. What a surprise. It's not a guarantee of wealth. Wages for college-educated people are actually flat, and the cost of college has soared. How every single argument he's made is fucking wrong.
4-year degree is getting higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, and it's becoming more of a has and has-nots when you look at like who has a degree and who doesn't.
I mean, again, we're getting back to an issue of, what's the alternative? It's not, I just don't see a situation where somebody is saying that Joe Biden does not have the ability to send that carpet, the pipe fitter, the carpet
cleaner,
cutter, $1,000 as opposed to this. I don't accept the premise that this is an either or situation, because I don't see what the alternative is in terms of what
not
he can unilaterally do.
Oh, sorry, good point.
You could argue from a political standpoint, again, I think there's probably maybe a slightly better argument there, although I'm not convinced that the salience or even.
I think the one problem with Destiny, I promise not to pause as much, but he says so much dumbass shit that I have to pause. This is literally taking me hours to watch because it's so many incorrect facts. So many incorrect assertions, I should say. One of the things that's really annoying about this is readily available information, and it's actually consensus information. This isn't like lefties only think that college is going up faster than inflation. This is an accepted fact of life.
That, who would be making it on the other side, that if Joe Biden wasn't to unilaterally do this, then the Republican Party would sign off on legislation that would send $1,000 to those people. But also, again, this study, it's not comparing people within this. It is looking at
household wealth. Who cares? Student loans are going to solve the wealth disparity.
If you're working class and your parents are millionaires, just to make it really explicit, you're in good shape. Your need to build assets is less because you're going to have a retirement. It's going to come from your parents when they die. Your need to worry about taking care of your parents when they start to get ill, when they have Alzheimer's, when they have
Sam, Destiny doesn't care about other people. See, Sam is coming to him thinking like, okay, you're going to take care of your kids, you're going to take care of your parents. He doesn't care about other people. You're trying so hard to explain how families work and things, but he doesn't care.
High blood pressure, when they need to take medication and to help them out, to make sure that they can pay rent.
Appealing to empathy, like, come on, man.
Far less. That's an extreme example, but that is the dynamic that's at play here. And that's why, I think it's legitimate to look at the question of progressivity as something like this.
We talk about parents dying, though. This is like your parents dying that's a later life thing.
It's not. When you're 30 or 40 years old, your parents start to die on average, okay? My dad is nearing his 70s, which means somewhere in the next decade, he's, according to life expectancy, he's expected to die. That's sad as fuck. But that's in the middle of my, quote, prime working years. And when he gets older, he's going to stop being able to earn an income. So I have to be concerned about if I care about my dad. I don't legally have to care. I could let him rot in the street. But since I do care about my dad, it's called, Jesus Christ. Like, this is actually a phenomenon. It's called like the sandwich generation? There it is. Sorry, chat. It's a sociological phenomenon called the sandwich generation. It's a group. This is Wikipedia, so we could trust it. Is a group of middle-aged adults who care for both their aging parents and their own children. It's a phenomenon that can affect anyone whose parents and children need support at the same time. The phenomenon was recognized in the late 20th century as changes in lifespan and later age for childbearing meant that mothers often had small children and frail parents at the same time. For example, in the early 20th century, a woman might have had her first child around age 20 when her own parents were around age 40, not typically in need of any special care. More recently, in developed countries, women have often had children closer to the age of 30 when their own parents are around age 60 and therefore at a much higher risk of needing support before the grandchildren have become adults. Like, this is this basic sociological phenomenon. It's like he's never read a book or an article or is aware of anything that's around him that's not on a stream. Ugh.
Heart goes out to people that this affects, but like if your parents are dying when you're 22, that's like you're in a way different situation. Like parents dying, that's something that should come
it's not when you're 22. It's when you're still paying student loans. So you're supposed to pay student loans, have kids, and care for your children at 30. Good luck. That's why there's no wealth in the millennial generation.
Ideally, when you're in your late 30s, maybe 40s, maybe 50s, like if your parents are dying when you're like 22 years old and you have to give like student loan money back to them, I think that's a little bit of a separate argument.
No, it's not a question of. First of all, it's simply a question of preparing. Like, look, if if you're 20 years old and you know that your parents are millionaires, you don't have to worry about building assets. You can spend. You can spend every dollar that comes in. You don't have to put it into a 401k. You don't have to save it for retirement. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about putting money aside in case they need it because they need support. You don't have to worry about providing money for them.
How is this even a debate? Destiny's saying wealth doesn't matter? Is he okay? Like what? Like, of course it matters. Wealth is just previous year's income. That's it. It's money. Money is fungible. Whether I earned it this week or last year, if it's in my bank account, it spends the same. What are you talking about?
Enough because, they didn't go to college. What
does having money have to do with paying off debts?
I mean, I'm not, if there was an argument that there's two options on the table, one that would give $1,000 to, or even let's say, Medicare for all or college debt, I would probably go for Medicare for all. But the dollar figures that we're talking about are far less, when we talk about forgiving student debt. And, again, this is also, money that the government has lent, and it's not even, I just don't see the either or option here. I mean, if
there is no either or option, Destiny's still debating like this is fucking August 2020. Or excuse me, August 2019. The idea that the government can't create money at the drop of a hat and spend it the willy-nilly has been utterly defeated by the coronavirus pandemic. We're about to spend $4 trillion on fucking roads. Who gives a shit? We can spend the money on whatever the fuck we want. It's made up, and we all know it now. So the idea that literally 50, 100 million people's lives should be held back by student loan debt for no good reason, there's no logic to it. It's not something that's... He's arguing in favor of the status quo. He's not actually making an argument in favor of charging tuition and student debt. He's just saying getting rid of student debt will not be perfectly progressive. It's not the most progressive way you could spend $1 trillion. Who gives a shit? Do you think the programs that the Republicans are arguing for right now are the most progressive programs we could possibly do? Of course not. The question is not whether it's the best possible program. The question is it better than the status quo? If the answer is it's better than status quo, then we should do it. If it's on the table, we should do it. Politics is the process of the second best. It is not some sort of utopian Twitter debate. Joe Biden has the power to forgive student loans with the stroke of a pen. He doesn't have to pass legislation through Congress. It would make society better. It would be positive for the wealth distribution in this country, especially for people of color. Then we should do it. It's just that simple.
You don't perceive
How
wealth
much are you
as
going to give to people who didn't go to college? They should go to college if they want. If they don't want to college, they don't have to go to college.
having an impact.
Similarly, sort of like if you don't want to finish high school, you can drop out. If you have a different life path, you're free to do that life path. If you want to go to college, you want to go to high school, it's going to be free. If you decide that you would rather spend that 4 years working a job, work a job. If you change your mind and you want to go to school, it should be free.
Someone's future life or current life and intergenerational wealth, then
you understand Mike made that title in bad faith, right? Because there's no way he could have if he destroyed him or not. Because I know Destiny's education level. I know Destiny's education level. I know his how informed he is on topics. I know that Sam Seder destroyed him because they were having a conversation. I don't need to know anything. And guess what? If I thought Destiny won the debate, I would say Destiny won the debate. For example, I think Destiny destroyed Vaush in their debate about the 2000 election because Vaush just didn't know what happened in 2000 in Florida. I'm happy to give Destiny credit when he destroys Vaush because Vaush doesn't know his ass from the hole in the ground and basic history. I am not a baby brain that is incapable of explaining when people are right about things and when they're wrong about things. So, like the idea that the butterfly ballot in Florida was a conspiracy by Jeb Bush is just not true. It was an incompetent Democrat who designed it, and we can know that that affected the outcome and gave Bush the lead in the recount when it was stopped by the Supreme Court. The election in Florida was stolen. It was just stolen by the U.S. Supreme Court. It wasn't stolen by Jeb Bush designing ballots to be fucked up in Palm Beach. That was Democrats' own incompetence. However, the Republicans did a whole bunch of shady shit, like the Brooks Brothers riot, where they interrupted the count and shut down a recount because they knew that Bush had a lead and the lead was narrowing as the hand recount took place. So if they could disrupt the hand recount long enough for it to run out of time before the safe harbor law, then they could steal the election, which is what they did. But those facts are important to know. If you're going to talk about stolen elections, you're going to talk about Bush v. Gore, you should probably read what happened.
Some level why I perceive it that way, but in terms of like real living life, to have, look, when I was 20, I was making, $9,000 a year, and I was eating, exclusively Chinese food because I'm working at a Chinese restaurant. But to be honest, I wasn't terribly worried about my future in the way that, maybe someone else working there would have been, because I'm like, you know what? I could take chances because my dad's a lawyer. He's, and worst case scenario, I can move home. You know what I mean? Like that impacts your decisions. The wealth that existed within the context of my family provided me freedom and the ability to risk and a sense of like, at the end of my life, if I haven't been able to accumulate assets, then I'll be okay. And also, I'm not going to have to worry about like.
Someone is oiling D to make these bad faith arguments, right? Learned hyper-conservative, hyper-individualist talking points to deliberately mislead people. There's no way this misinformed and able to reason effectively. I just think that he's taking a position that's against the left.
For them, they're going to be fine, at least to a certain point in their age. So.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on because wealth is something that if you have so many years to acquire, it can grow so much larger than somebody else. Like, who do you think is going to have more trouble providing for their parents?
If you can put that money into assets.
But the problem is that people have a really hard time, especially young people, understanding what is wealth. To go back to the Bernie Sanders thing, people say, oh, Bernie Sanders is $1 million. He's got $1 million. Having $1 million when you're 80 is way different than having $1 million when you're 25. Who's going to, who is...
That's obviously true. But the type of people with student loan debt don't have $1 million when they're 25 because they have student loan debt. There are almost zero 25-year-olds that have legitimately $1 million. Unless they got lucky and bought Bitcoin when they were on 4chan 5 years ago, there's very few 25-year-olds who didn't get that money through wealth from their family, okay? Either they're like an athlete, a model, an actor, or somebody who got rich from their family. If you're 25, having $1 million is pretty goddamn rare.
Who is wealthier, right? When we have, say, you've just got a guy who's just working normal job, 30, 35 years old, his parents have $500,000 in the bank versus a guy that just graduated as a doctor whose, parents are broke. Well, who's going to have more trouble taking care of their parents, right? The doctor guy, yeah, he's going to take a hit in the beginning, but the NPV, the net present value.
By the way, that's, oh my God, he just learned net present value, didn't he? He just learned net present value. If anything, that argues against your point, Destiny, because debt now is more damaging because it's current dollars. And so the current dollars are growing because there's interest applied. So you're talking about future earnings, which are discounted because they're worth less than net present dollars. So debt now is more damaging than debt in the future. And income now is more valuable than income in the future. Correspondingly, if you have student loan debt now, that's more damaging to you than not having student loan debt, obviously, because it's present dollars. So taxing you in the future when you have high income is less damaging to you than having you have debt now. Duh.
Of that degree, those future earnings are huge. He might be screwed right there. If his parents get in a catastrophic car accident, he's 28, he's doing residency. Yeah, maybe that guy will be screwed for a little bit. That one example, well, no, because it'd just be funeral that one, right? But generally speaking, the guy that's graduating as a doctor or as a lawyer or as working for Amazon, Google, Facebook, it doesn't matter if the other guy that's working at a lawn service have parents that have saved away $500,000. That doctor or that lawyer or that managerial class person, he's going to outpace the other dude in a decade, and he's going to blow him away, and then his kids are going to be better off for it, and every part of his family and life is going to be better off for it.
But okay, Jesus Christ. If that happens, we can collect taxes on the wealthy doctor and lawyer, but it's not guaranteed to happen because the future is not set. We're not in a mechanical universe where we know everything and that's going to happen in the future. I know you know this because you initially supported Pete Buttigieg for president, and then you supported Kamala Harris, and then you supported Elizabeth Warren, and then you supported Mike Bloomberg, and then you supported Joe Biden. Okay? So you couldn't see the future. You went through 5 different candidates in the Democratic primary. So the future is not fixed. So yes, if the doctors, everything works out for the doctor and he makes high income, he might be better off than the guy from the rich family. Might, by the way, because during that 5 years that he's earning income and paying debt, the rich kid's family is also investing their wealth and growing it. So we don't know. Maybe he's, so even if I assume he's better off, so what? Tax him then. Tax the high income guy.
But your presumption is that that person's going to be able to build assets because they're not going to have the expenses associated
Don't
with it.
forget the
but they're
rock bottom
going to
Delaney
have more,
face. Oh, yeah.
They're going to.
Oh, yeah, chat. Look at this. Look at this, chat. Chat, look at this. Destiny said, exclamation point Delaney. Delaney made a ton of amazingly effective challenges to progressive platforms tonight, revoking private insurance, isolationist foreign policy. Expect to see progressives on Twitter incredibly ass-pained about him for the next day or two. That is a worse prediction than any prediction I've ever made in my entire life.
To have more expenses associated with that, and also the family with wealth. I mean, that's
rare spam.
The illustration of Bernie Sanders at that age, having accumulated that money when he's 80, versus the person whose parents, when they go to college, have that kind of money, is the point. And so, you know, when that person goes out and they graduate college, and their parents are going to help out with. Their parents are going to help out. Well, they've already helped out maybe a little bit with college. They don't have to take the same type of size of loans. But we also know that, like, okay, you know, my kids, preschool. Well, we'll pay for your kids' preschool. We'll help you out with that, and you can put some money away. I mean, that's the dynamic. That is the implications of having this intergenerational wealth. Is you have help.
My God, this
you have
debate is never going to end.
That are there
He says stupid shit every time he opens his mouth.
as you're getting older. And if in the
every
absence
time he
of that,
talks, it's this
again,
dumb fucking
those
comment.
dollars have to do more. I mean, it's the same concept of almost like of being poor is more expensive than being rich, because you have the ability to deploy your money in such a way that is more efficient when you're wealthy, because you have more control over it. You have more flexibility. It's same dynamic.
I mean, like, I understand everything you're saying, but I think that in a heartbeat, somebody with wealthy parents and poor parents and somebody that has a really good degree versus a high school education, I think you would trade out your wealthy parents for a
You're
better
an idiot, and he's a fucking moron. Absolute idiot. No one would make that trade. No one would make that trade, because if you're rich parents, they can pay for your degree. One more time. Dumbest comment I've ever heard.
Somebody with wealthy parents and poor parents and somebody that has a really good degree versus a high school education, I think you would trade out your wealthy parents for a better degree every single time, unless your parents are absolutely loaded.
Well, then why wouldn't you go get that degree?
Well, that's what people that go to school do, right?
No,
but
I'm
this
saying-
is like that's actually a whole.
Yes, wealthier people go to school at a higher rate because they can afford to. And it's less risky. He's... How does Sam not just have his mind explode?
Whole other different kind of problem too is that something that they've seen in other areas. So in the UK, when you look at education, when you make education free or discounted, sometimes that helps like people that are already doing pretty well even more, because it's not a matter of like the cost of going to school, it's the opportunity cost of not staying home and helping with family and doing that stuff as well. So you get like, you make like, say, I'm not against free college, but say you like make college free, the people that can take advantage of that are the people that can just have a 4-year break in their life, go do that, their family is fine. Whereas people that are like working poor, that have to work to
That's, oh my God. Oh my God.
support their household, they can't take advantage of that free college. They actually need like.
That's why if you were a social democrat, you would have a social welfare state that supported everybody, no matter what age they were in, and guaranteed income, guaranteed housing, guaranteed childcare, guaranteed health care, so that no one would have to support their family's basic necessities and prevent them from getting a college degree. They would qualify academically for the degree, and then they would pursue the degree because it was provided by the society, because we're the richest country in the world and we can afford it. And that's what the best countries in the world do. The empirically best countries with highest happiness are the ones who don't say to 20-year-olds, you better support your family or live on the fucking street. They say, hey, college is free. Here's a stipend. We'll pay you to go to school. And we'll get it back to you when you earn money later in the form of taxes.
A subsidy. They need to get like payment transfers to
I
them.
don't, what the hell is he talking about?
Yeah, I think.
Well, but that I mean, that's consistent with what I'm saying. Like you just said that if you were, maybe I misheard you, but you said that I would rather be a guy with poor parents and get the degree than rich parents and not get the degree. But if you have rich parents, you have the ability to get the degree. You don't even need to take a loan. That's
We keep saying that, but the reality is that 60% of the debt is held by the top 40% of like earners.
40%, top 40% is not rich. Here it is. What percentage, chat? 40th percentile? Okay, so he said top 40th percentile, so that's 60%. $74,000 a year is not rich if you own 50 fucking grand in student loans. That's not rich. And that's household income. That's everyone in your household. That's not rich. That's both adults. 74,000 is rich now. I'm top 40% by the skin of my neck and 300K for my law degree. I'm rich, Mike. Yeah, James, you're rich.
No, but they're not earners yet.
But they will be. That's why you get the degree. Unless I mean, there's a separate conversation. Do we think that the degrees are like they're not actually going to make money, or because this is an argument that I hear a lot too. A lot of people seem to be, and a lot of these arguments. I'm not saying you're doing this, but it feels like a lot of the arguments are people saying like, well, these degrees are ultimately worthless.
Well, I think that there's enough data to show, at least, up until this time, that the degree, does help you for most people. It doesn't help in the same way.
By the way, chat, I went and looked up individual income. The 60th percentile for individual income is 53%. Or $53,000, not 53%. $53,000 is the 60th percentile in individual income. Rich! You're rich! We better not forgive your debt, $53,000 a year guy, because you're rich, according to Destiny. Smart man. Destiny stands think this guy is smart.
For black people as it does for white people, disparity there, but the income is just simply not as worth as much.
Finmars, thanks for the tier
one. If you
one.
have more claims to that money, right? Like you got to look at like wealth to debt ratio.
Also, chat, Mod, all the money I earn today, I'm gifting to our favorite mod, Sushi Mom. Sushi Mom is going through a rough patch. So any money you give me today, I'm just giving to Sushi Mom. So I will appreciate that. Who's in Cleveland? Nina Turner is running for Congress. There's a special election next week. The GoFundMe link is in there right now. If you want to go contribute to her GoFundMe, that would be great. That would be very sweet of you. So, thank you all for supporting the stream.
To get an assessment of what your real lived experience is.
That's not it. We don't even evaluate loans like that, like wealth to debt. You always look at income to debt, right? Like you're not just looking at like, unless you're literally getting a secured loan.
If you get a mortgage, they're going to look at your wealth too.
They're going to look at your income.
No, they're going to look at your wealth, and I can assure you, they're going to look at your wealth and your liabilities, your assets.
I forgot how
and
dumb
your income.
Destiny is.
Okay. I promise you that they're going to look at your income. They might look at some level of wealth, but like that income is going to be the deciding factor, right? If you have really high wealth and no income, you're not going to get a mortgage, but they're going to make you pay cash for it or put down a huge down payment on it, like 50%. But if you have like really high income and not as much wealth,
RocketMortgage.net. When a lender goes over your home loan application, they'll take a look at your credit score, total debt, total income, as well as your overall net worth. Your net worth matters because it tells your lender how much money between your income and assets you really have. You might wonder how net worth is calculated. Your lender will subtract all of the debts you owe from your total assets in order to calculate your net worth, which will give them a better picture of just how much money you actually have. Your net worth allows a lender to get a better picture of how you will make your mortgage payments, down payment, and closing costs. They'll also take your assets into consideration to determine how you'd make your payments if you lost your job. Could you stay afloat for a few months? Your lender can decide how risky of a buyer you are by taking a look not only at your checking and savings accounts, but also the amount of equity you have tied up in assets. What are assets anyway? Assets are items you own that have monetary value. Cash and cash equivalent assets, physical assets, non-physical assets, liquid assets, fixed assets, equity assets, and fixed income assets. Destiny is a fucking moron.
And your income.
Well, okay. I promise you that they're going to look at your income.
To get an assessment of what your real lived experience is.
That's not. We don't even evaluate loans like that, like wealth to debt. You always look at income to debt, right? Like you're not just looking at unless you're
almost the entire community saw what he is saying play out with Hassan, tried to find a house. We all know Hassan is playing money, but because of his low credit score and inability to show stable income, all streamers have this issue unless they have an LLC. They'll ask you for a big down payment. They look at your assets.
Thanks for being the best.
I don't know what to say. He's just dead wrong.
If you get a mortgage, they're going to look at your wealth too.
They're going to look at your income.
No, they're going to look at your wealth, and I can assure you, they're going to look at your wealth and your liabilities, your assets, and your income.
Okay. I promise you that they're going to look at your income. They might look at some level of wealth, but that income is going to be the deciding factor.
How do you assess wealth, Omega Lol? Hey, how do you watch a streamer this incompetent? Toa Vecna, thanks for the 10 gift sub. How do you look at a streamer this incompetent and think that he knows anything? He doesn't even know how. This is a Google search. How do I loan application? We look at your assets. He told Sam Seder no. Like how do you think this guy is smart? Seriously, this is such a basic question. It's mind-numbing how basic this is. And he's saying he knows policy better than Sam Seder. I mean, how can you be an adult? Are there no adults in Destiny's community? Never mind. Yes, there are not. I'm sorry.
Right? If you have really high wealth and no income, you're not going to get a mortgage. But
Wrong. Wrong. If you have a lot of wealth, you will get a loan. And it'll be limited by your wealth. Say you want to get something and you have $100 million in assets. I have no job, but I have $100 million in assets. And I go to the bank and say, hey, can I borrow $1 million? Because those assets are not liquid, right? You get $100 million in non-liquid assets. So you can't, you would have to sell those assets. And that would be a taxable event if there was capital gains. So you don't want to sell your assets that are not liquid. So what do? You go to the bank and say, I have $100 million. Can I borrow $1 million? They're going to say yes. Because if you don't pay the money, they can just go after some of those assets and use it to pay themselves back in the event of a default. This is so basic that I can't believe he has opinions on things. Read one book. Just one book. You get to pick it. I'll even let it be Harry Potter. Just read one book.
Going to make you pay cash for it or put down a huge down payment on it, like 50%. But if you have really high income and not as much wealth built yet, especially if you're younger, they'll write you the loan. If you've got a consistent income, you can show over 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. Income is absolutely the biggest factor, right?
Well, income might be a bigger factor in terms of getting a loan.
It depends on the individual circumstances. I can tell you right now, if you have $100 million, the fact that you don't have income is not going to matter.
They certainly do look at wealth, of course. I mean, that plays into it significantly. If you have no money in your bank, I can assure you that you're not going to get that loan. And
for example, if you make $1 million a year but have $0 in the bank's going to be like, that's pretty irresponsible. Even though you have high income, where is it all going? And they're going to think you're riskier than someone who makes $100,000 and has $10 million in the bank.
because
Well, okay, the exact ratio will depend upon how they evaluate those things, but you see what I'm saying.
lose that job tomorrow. But nevertheless, wealth to debt is
Brentstone says, I underwrite mortgages. We look at everything. Wealth is definitely a big factor. If you have enough wealth, no income needed.
it seems to me a better assessment of like of what your real lived experience is. But I mean, look, if at the very least, I think that, like, if it comes down to, what is a better measure to progressivity, it's just a matter, I guess, of disposition on some level. I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer on that from a data perspective. It's just really just a
Cool.
experiential
Guru,
one.
thank you.
If it was possible to like flip a switch, I don't know if the Department of Education do that. I don't know how Biden has control, but like for me, like I think having like
I don't know if it's possible. Could you research something first before you start having an opinion? My God, this is cringe. My God, this is cringe.
income-based repayment or income-driven repayment feels like the obvious, like, best way. That if you come out of school and you're not making that much money, then your repayments are going to be structured.
And then
I think
what?
Australia-
And then what? The interest accrues and the debt goes up. That's what happens in income-based repayment. Do you mean we should forgive debt, but dependent upon your income in a highly sliding scale that's complicated, and you've got to fill out 10 forms for, or what? This point is, I'm sorry for interrupting it because it's so stupid. It's so dumb.
Yeah, I think the UK does. I think a lot of countries do this, where as you earn more, then you start to pay back more if you need to, rather than just everybody is saddled with
The
like a
UK
blanket.
literally didn't start charging tuition until like 10 years ago, and there was a huge protest, and it's like £1,000 a year.
Get that. Would you be in favor of like that kind of like program if that was something that was like made the default instead of an opt-in in the US?
I mean, I would.
Well, part of the reason why Destiny hates me is the conversation we had on AOC being economically illiterate. I tried to explain to him that rich people could borrow against their assets for consumption and not pay taxes, and he screeched that it wasn't possible. He screamed at the top of his lungs, and I was like, wait, what? He's like, you're a liar. They can't borrow against their stocks. You can't do that. And I was like, what? That's what rich people do. They don't sell their assets. They borrow for consumption. You can go look. You could go watch it. It's funny. It's so funny.
Prefer debt relief. I think that would do. Because I think with the income-based repayment, again, we're ignoring where people sit.
The way student debt works in the UK is you pay it back depending on how much you earn. You pay no student debt unless you paid a certain amount. It's proportional to your income. That's still a terrible system, but yeah.
In the only issue for people is not just their income. It is the other assets that they have.
Actually, I think I posted a YouTube video of that recently. Hold on.
Available to them.
Maybe the mods
either
can find the link
ones
for
they
me.
can anticipate in the future or ones that they have now, right? I mean, like, my pension is not something I have now. I don't have access to it. I can't access it until I'm 65, but it does provide me with a material benefit now, which is that I know I don't have to save. I only have to save X amount of dollars. And so, I think the problem with the income-based repayment, it's better than the payment structures that we have now, but it is less desirable, it seems to me, than debt forgiveness on both a drag on our economy and a drag on many people's ability to sort of like to live a better life. And also, I would say it's a detriment to our society insofar as like who's going into more, in my opinion, socially beneficial jobs, but are
All right, maybe I didn't
lower
post it.
wage.
Oh, wait, hold
than,
on.
Others. So we're
Wait, hold
losing
on.
Against the value of my investment because you don't have to pay any taxes on
Okay,
it.
I yelled as well. That may have happened.
When
may
it's
have
laid
happened.
out simply like that, without all the intentionally dense tax language and obfuscation, it becomes clear how absurd the whole thing is. The fact that
Around 21 minutes in. All right, hold on. Let's
Did
see
you
this.
timestamp it? No, you're gonna make me do it manually. Okay, cool. Wait a minute. Do you think fucking?
Why would I borrow against the value of my investment?
Because you don't have to pay any taxes on it. That's why. If you borrow against the value of your shares, you never have to pay taxes.
Holy shit, same shirt. This was a month ago. Oh, fuck, exposed.
So you can spend money.
Somebody in chat has to tell me, I'm not going to take his word for it. Somebody in chat, do you borrow against the value of, I know that you can take out a loan, for instance,
Exposed.
against your 401k or like a Roth IRA, but those you have to be able to show hardship to do that. You can't just do that willy-nilly.
Yes, you can. Of course you can.
No, you can't.
Of course you
These
can
are
borrow.
tax advantage investment accounts. You cannot just take fucking loans against
Oh, no,
them.
not those, you idiot. I'm talking about.
You have to be able to show hardship in order to do
Destiny.
that. That's the whole point of these tax advantage accounts.
Destiny, you're arguing against a position I don't have. I'm saying you can borrow against. Now, if you have a 401k, you're a fucking middle class person. Who gives a shit? Talking
If you have
about
a 401k,
real
you can
rich
take it a
people.
borrow against it. You can take it a loan against it. But guess what? Your assets don't grow when you have that loan out against it. It's horrible. I'm sorry. If you guys are listening, because I don't know if you get shit financial advice here, please do not take out loans against your 401k. It is one of the worst.
No
decisions you
shit,
can
I'm
make.
not advocating for that. I'm saying that if you are rich, if you're Jeff Bezos, does you think he liquidates his shares to buy shit? Or does he borrow
Yes,
against it?
he needs liquid cash because that's how we purchase things in the United States.
All right, he's incredibly stupid. He's incredibly stupid. And this is called this is the program here. There's a thing called live. We've covered this before. Go watch that video if you want. But he actually screeched at when I was like, well, wealthy people, the way they get around taxes, paying capital gains is they borrow against it. He screamed that it's not real. And I was like, what? And so you could see from the conversation that I had with Destiny is he started screeching and yelling. Look at margin on section 2. Margin. Just as a bank can lend you money against the equity in your home, your brokerage firm can lend you money against the value of eligible stocks, bonds, exchange-traded funds, and mutual funds in your portfolio. Margin loans typically require a minimum of $2,000 in cash or marginal securities and generally limited to 50% of the investment's value. Interest rates vary depending on the amount being borrowed, but tend to be lower than unsecured lending options such as credit cards. When to use it? Funds borrowed on margin are usually for additional investments or short-term liquidity needs. As with any line of credit, you can draw from and replenish a margin account for any reason, not just purchasing securities. A margin loan is a ready source of credit that may be used as a short-term loan for any need. A securities-based line of credit. A securities-based line of credit offered through a bank allows you to borrow against the value of portfolio, usually at variable interest rates. Assets are pledged as collateral and held in a separate brokerage account at a broker-dealer. Unlike margin, these non-purpose credit lines may not be used to purchase securities or pay down margin loans, nor can funds be deposited into any brokerage account. Such lines of credit also tend to require more borrowing than a margining account. This is what I'm talking about, securities-based lines of credit. Like, literally, this is basic shit. Basic knowledge. He lacks basic knowledge about how the financial system works, and he puts himself out there as an expert. It's cringe. It's cringe.
Out on quality social workers
And that's all
teachers
untaxed.
because of certain debt. We're losing out on, more public interest lawyers because of debt. I mean, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think there's a problem with like having like, and I think we already do this in parts of the U.S. where there are certain types of degrees that you get like reimbursed for depending on if you go into like public field work. I know that there
Incidentally, that also was something that came up. There was a program that was specifically about that that we had.
By the way, borrow. Yeah, how the wealthy stay that way. Here. Here.
Some of the very richest Americans pay little in taxes compared with how fast their fortunes grow each year. How? They use a tax strategy known as buy, borrow, die. It's like the ultra wealthy are living on another planet. Average people need income to pay for basics like housing and food. But the ultra wealthy don't. They can just live on borrowed cash. Step 1, buy. The ultra wealthy buy an asset or build a company or inherit a fortune. As long as they don't sell, they owe no taxes. They keep their income as low as possible since every dollar they earn can be taxed. Step 2, borrow. They borrow against their holdings and the bank gives them a really good deal.
I'll loan you $10 million
can't do
with
this,
only
by the way.
3% interest.
By the way, you can't do
But
this.
if you take a
This
$10
is all
million
fake.
salary from your company, you'll owe almost 37%.
By the way, chat. I made this video. I created this video just to lie and gaslight you all. This is all fake. Actually, this is fake. The rich people don't do this. Destiny was right. He's totally informed on policy and finance. He also argued with Professor Wolf about fiduciary duty. He's brain dead. And he got it factually wrong there as well.
Sent to the IRS.
Never listen to him about anything.
So the ultra wealthy use loan money to fund their lifestyles. That's how a billionaire can live the most luxurious life imaginable while reporting little to no taxable income. Step 3, die. When they die, these lucky few often use complicated trusts and philanthropic foundations to avoid the estate tax. And their heirs can inherit stocks and other assets tax-free. A new generation is ultra wealthy, and the cycle starts all over again.
The 10-year public service program from 2007 to 2017. Those people graduate. They worked for 10 years in those jobs, which supposedly would have relieved their debt. And apparently, if you go to the consumer complaint registry in your state, you'll see that all these servicers have been engaging in massive amount of fraud. That's the other thing that is like we didn't even get to. Was just like this.
I used to
is
suffer and die technique,
servicers
slightly different. Yeah.
are just as despicable as
Yeah.
they were during the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. And these loan servicers
Arachno Zach is right.
Are really.
We're almost done with the debate. It only
I
goes
think
for
if you
5
look
more
at
minutes.
the consumer complaints, in a significant amount of fraud, it seems to me.
Sure, and that might be the case. I mean, there could be fraud in literally everything, right? There are people that fraudulently file tax forms.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, of course.
But
if that happens, that's bad, and it
but-
should be fixed,
but
obviously, of course.
My experience during the but I also think it might be a little bit endemic when you have servicers who are getting money based on fees and whatnot. The incentive structure is really messed up, it seems to me. But
Yeah, that could be the case. Just on this thing, when we talk about how like student loan debt has this drag on people's ability to live better lives and everything, and when it's like a drag on the economy, why do so many people still get degrees then?
you know what? I think there's a lot of people.
Well, first of all, a degree is better for you in the long run, but it's adding an additional drag and risk because we make calculations and we guess that it's going to work. But for many people, getting an education will make their life path better than not having an education. However, it still is a drag on their life because they have debt. The question isn't whether or not you get a degree. The question is, should we have people getting degrees with debt or should degrees be free? And that's the comparison we're making because everyone agrees we want college educated people in our society. The question is, should someone carry debt because they got a college degree? And the answer to that, empirically, is no. It's a bad idea. And if you're saying, well, what about income inequality? Well, my answer would be, let's take another policy that's better at countering income inequality and tax the people when they actually earn the money. It's so simple.
Look, I've known people who work in the for-profit college industry. And I consider that business to be more or less a criminal activity.
Like working at private schools, or what do you mean?
No. Private colleges. The for-profit colleges, excuse me.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of people who, particularly people who do not come from wealthy families, who may be first generation going to college, who are hoodwinked into these for-profit universities. And
For-profit universities are a problem, but they're a small problem. They're not the actual student debt problem. The student debt problem is from legitimate institutions. For-profits are definitely bad and we should get rid of them, but even non-profit in public institutions still are creating these massive debt loads. And why is that? It's because state funding for education has been cut. That is actually a fact. There was a study by 538 fancy dorms. Fancy dorms aren't the reason tuition is skyrocketing. The rapid increase in the cost of college in recent decades and the association explosion in student debt, which now totals nearly 1.3 trillion when that article was written, it's now 1.7, is all too familiar to many Americans, but few understand what caused the tuition boom, particularly at public institutions that enroll roughly 2/3 of all students. Average tuition revenue per student, adjusted for inflation, increased by $5,880 between 2001 and 2013. State appropriations per student have declined nearly $4,000 over the same period, from $7,750 to $3,900. Put another way, if Pennsylvania restored funding for higher education to its 2000 levels, Pennsylvania public research institutions could reduce tuition by nearly $4,000 per year without altering their budgets. And then you can see, share of tuition hike explained by funding cuts. And whenever a number is above 100%, that means that the university has actually found efficiency or found alternate ways of revenue that wasn't tuition. So in Colorado, 101% of the tuition increases are due to budget cuts from the state. Arizona, 111. Florida, 150. Iowa, 110. South Carolina, 83. Mississippi, 211. Mississippi's state universities have kept their tuition low, even though they've seen a massive increase. Their tuition only went up $2,000 when they had their funding cut $4,000. And pretty much every state, the majority of the increase in tuition is due to state budget cuts. That's why tuition is going up.
Just simply don't have
Fiend, thanks for the tier one.
savvy. They know that they sense that they need a college degree to go further in their career. And then they find that this college degree from blankety blank for-profit university isn't really worth much, or that they can't afford to maintain it. And so either they graduate and find that a degree does not pay off in the way that they think it's going to, or they get through a semester or two and realize they can't afford it, and then they're straddled with this debt that they don't have.
Yeah, if we're talking about like the unaccredited like scam colleges or whatever, well, I call them.
No, they're accredited. They're all accredited. They're accredited. That's why they wouldn't be eligible for public loans if they weren't accredited. I mean, the Obama administration made some headway in sort of like tightening what those credentials things, and then of course the Trump administration came in and blew it apart. If you want to look at something that goes even that performed even better than Jeff Bezos's rocket trip, take a look at like funds of for-profit colleges. Literally 15 minutes after the election was over in 2016, they shot up like this, like a trajectory like this. They have since come back down to earth in terms of the stock market, because the pandemic was also problematic for them too, I think, but counterintuitively. But
okay, sure. But getting away from like the I guess there might be some strange.
Well, that's a huge portion of these massive Fortune 500 for-profit universities. 95% of their income, their revenue, comes from student loans.
Sure, but when we
This
say
is a
huge portion, what I'm asking is like, do you agree that for the vast majority of people, 95% plus, like having a college degree does not represent a drag on their ability to live a better life, even with loans included? That the vast majority of these people, 95% plus, are coming out better.
No. So that's an empirical question that you can't just say 95% of people are better off. We don't know. That's not how it works. And that has nothing to do with the idea that we should or shouldn't forgive student loans. Just because people are better off getting an education doesn't mean we should charge for it.
I mean, they graduate than when they went into it.
Holy God.
I don't know that figure. I would imagine it's higher. It's above 50%. Let's put it that way. I don't know if it's 95%, but we're not talking about we're not talking about the cohort of people who graduate college. We're talking about the cohort of people who take student loan debt. Mm-hmm. And that includes people who don't graduate and people who've graduated, but may be positioned in society in a way that people who didn't have to take student loan debt and get a college degree are not, because 100% of your income can be deployed to, after your basic, existence can be deployed to building assets over time. That's not necessarily the case if you don't come from wealth or you don't have a wealthy household. I mean, if you're married to, someone who also doesn't have student loan debt, and you have two incomes there, obviously that makes a big, difference as to how you can save. I mean, just as an example to when we talk about household wealth. But I got to go, and I think we may not agree on this, but at least I feel like we it's clear what the
household wealth versus
is.
the income thing. Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, listen,
Household
I really
and
appreciate that.
intergenerational wealth. Yes.
Sure.
I'm sorry we didn't get to the men's rights.
Oh no, I didn't care as much about that one. I was more curious about the college.
Say about that, frankly.
All right. Well, hey, listen, I appreciate the conversation. Where can people find you? Everybody knows who you are, but just in case.
Out on the street, Flatbush, more often than not.
Gotcha.
Walking back and forth.
All
They're
right.
right here. They can find me right there.
I believe Sam's kids are in New York City public schools. I think he talked about magnet school applications a while ago, so I'm pretty sure his kids are in New York City public schools.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate the conversation.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
I didn't think we'd get in the weeds so much on the wealth versus income thing. I thought that was a
Oh my God, he's so. I'm not watching that after. I'm not watching the after debate cope. Like, have you talked about Chicago passing an ordinance, the strongest police oversight commission in the U.S.? Holy shit, dude. If you think Destiny had even one good point, I seriously question your ability to function within society. He said that people that make $53,000 a year are rich. Every factual point he made was wrong. Well, okay, not everyone. He was right that people with college degree do tend to make more money, but it's been flat. He's wrong. He just made so many if someone would go through that entire stream and get all the factually inaccurate claims that I corrected, it's like at least 10. Okay, maybe I'm a weirdo, but I would feel rich if I made $100K a year. That would be, you would be doing well. And you should pay taxes. You should pay taxes on that. That took longer than I thought it would, but it was so poorly argued on Destiny's side that it took up like my entire stream practically. It was like 3 hours of that. You started that video 3.5 hours ago. Oh my God. Well, it's an important point. Chad, it's a very important point. It's a very important issue. And we shouldn't, let the bad arguments just go. Lower end of upper class is typically defined by the government. Many studies, which I think is like 120, 130K a year. Depends on what you mean. A brief palate cleanser? Okay, thank you. Oh, it thinks there's a yellow light because of the sun? It thinks there's a yellow light because of the sun? We do politics here every morning starting at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. You can watch us here on Twitch. We're the morning guy, the morning politics guy. Politics Frogs in every single day, same time, 10 a.m., day in, day out. And we carry you through your morning and early afternoon politics needs. And if you need more, Mike from PA, we have a YouTube channel. We talked about suburbs, the My Pillow guy, Ted Cruz. We talked about DSA. Amazing. Making fun of Tim Pool. Amazing. Look at all of these amazing videos. Get in there, watch them. We have me on Twitter. You got to follow me on Twitter, chat. I'm at 20,614 subs. That means I got like 40 followers on Twitter in the last day. You can do better than that. You can do better than that. Go follow us on Twitter. And of course, join the Discord. where we have an incredible community of left-wing streamers. We have left-wing community. We talk about the stream. We talk about politics. There's gaming content. It's a really awesome, supportive place. Direct action, mutual aid, and you can just let off some steam. And also, you can help produce the show. One of the things I do is I look at the links that are put into the news content suggestions chat room on the Discord. Join the Discord, come hang out, and maybe what you want me to talk about will be part of the next show.